because there just aren't enough of us with awards to do that, but it does need to be expanded on. Next thing I want to talk about is we all have internal biases. This is just a blanket statement. If you don't agree with that, I'm not going to argue with you, but it's there. And if you're not ready to confront your internal biases, that's fine. But this might not be a comfortable presentation for you if that's the case. I do want to encourage everybody to ask questions though. I think that we learn best through asking questions. Since there's so many people, there might not be time for voice-to-voice dialogue until after, but I do believe that some of the best learning comes from conversations and discussions. It's something that I miss being COVID bound, is that we don't get to have our fireside discussions as frequently anymore, because those are some of my favorite times, is the Friday evening discussions. False sense of gender equality. When I first joined the SCA, one of the things that I remember hearing consistently over and over and over and over is that it's an equal playing field for men and women. I have since come to find that that's not the case. It's an ideal that I think many people strive for in the SCA, but it's definitely not accurate. And we see that because I know a lot of the behaviors, people are positive and they're supportive generally through their words of wanting to see women and gender minority fighters participate and receive awards and, you know, be furthered in their paths. But currently, a lot of things that would be deemed as traditionally feminine are othered. And masculinity is the default in our environments. Which makes it difficult for women to want to progress, because it means that you're going to have to conform your ways of living and being and expressing yourself to an environment in order to further yourself. So, you know, even though we like to think that we have gender neutral practices, we definitely don't. Women do not have access to the same kinds of opportunities as men just because of the fact that it is a masculine environment. And I think we see this through teaching, we see this through the numbers and the stats. And if women aren't going to feel welcome, and if gender minority fighters aren't going to feel welcome, they will usually just quietly leave. They're not going to tell you why. They just kind of disappear and they go to another environment where they feel like they can be themselves more fully without having to change in order to succeed. And I know, so like, for example, I know that when I talk with my husband, lots of times when we're at events, you'll point out people who used to be rapier fighters, just because he knows he's been around for a while. He's like, oh yeah, she used to fight rapier. She used to fight rapier too. Yeah, she used to fight rapier. And I've been to so many events where I hear that and I realize that there's actually a lot of women within the SCA who have fought rapier, but they just haven't stuck with it. And you see that a lot, and you see there's a lot of turnover with that. And I think that the leaky pipeline paper that was recently done really talks about that as well, that there is certain points that we lose our women and gender minority fighters. And it's for a lot of different reasons. It could be for lack of support. It could be for lack of representation. It could be that they don't believe that they can get to that point. There's a lot of things that kind of lead up to that dropout. And like I said, they're not going to tell you. They just kind of quietly fade away into the background. They just stop showing up to practices as much. Maybe they don't go to the big tournaments anymore, and they just kind of start getting more involved in something like ANS or something else that's more accepting of traditionally feminine ways of being and stuff. The other thing, the last point here is just that when we talk about helping women and gender minority fighters, it may to some people look like you're going to have to give them more help. And in some cases you will, because we have set up an environment that benefits a very specific type of person, and that is usually men, 25 or older, who are a certain, body size or shape, depending on the area that you're in. And that's who this society is built for. And because it's built for them, it's hard for women to adapt to that. And so you are going to have to give some women and gender minority fighters what looks like more help than what you would give men, because women are working against the grain in this environment. There is just more resistance for us moving forward and such. So there's going to be more hills that we have to jump over and more things that we need to kind of jump through to get to the end result. And so, yeah, we are going to need a little bit more help. And that's okay. That's just what good learning looks like. Not everybody starts in the same place. And I think if you want to create a really good learning environment, you're going to have to get used to the fact that everybody starts at different places and some people are going to need more help than others. I'm just checking the chat. Yeah, unconscious bias training. There's a lot of that. Our training environments, if you want to look at your training environments and you're kind of, because I get this question a lot from a lot of different people is, well, what can we do? What can I do? What can I do? What can we do to make women feel more comfortable? There's like this kind of physical, tangible thing that people would like to grab onto. And I think that you can ask yourself some questions. Are you equipped to help gender minority fighters? Do you have equipment? Do you have small gorgets? I have a 13-inch neck. That's tiny. I have never, ever owned a gorget that fits me properly, ever. I have a long neck and it's very skinny. So most of my gorgets come to about here. And they have about that much gap and they wiggle and they twist around my neck. I've never been to a practice that actually has a gorget that would fit my neck. Do you have chest protection for people who have sensitive chests or would like to have, a little bit more padding there? Do you have that? Is that on hand? And do you have a variety of sizes of chest protection? And I'm not talking, the booby formed ones, because that's great for women or people who have boobs, but do you have flat ones? Because there's a lot of diversity in chest protection. Do you have that? Do you have the equipment needed to support these people as they show up to your practices? Are you willing to change your environment to support people who don't look like you? Because if you're not willing to change the way you run things, I don't know how to help you. If that's the case, if you don't want to change the way you do things, you're not going to support female fighters. You're not going to be able to support gender minority fighters, and you're just not going to grow your environment. You're just going to stay stagnant and constantly wondering, I don't know. We had a few women who showed up and then they just never came around again. It's like, well, you need to change. We do need to change. The other thing is, if you're a female fighter, you need to address your own internalized biases, because we all have it. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of women, we tend to change ourselves to fit an environment so that we can succeed, especially, as mentioned, because fighting is an inherently masculine environment. It doesn't fit us. It just doesn't. It wasn't designed with us in mind. And so we start to adapt a mentality of being the exception to the rule. And I think that's really damaging. It's really damaging for other women who want to fight, because other women who are maybe more traditionally feminine, who haven't grown up with sports or are maybe not as competitive or just don't want to change, are unwilling to change, they're not going to stick around, and it's not going to benefit us as a whole. And I think this is one of those points that I see in environments, and for me, it's kind of like the elephant in the room, and I don't want to be rude and call someone out on a poor mindset, but at the same time, I recognize that we have that. I've had it. I think anyone who's grown up through the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s understands the mindset of, I can do anything you can do, but better. Just let me train harder. I can train longer. I can train better. And that really encourages things like injuries. That encourages, burnout. And really, I don't know. I don't, as a female fighter, I don't want to have to train and practice 3-4 times as hard as a guy just to get recognition. I don't. But that's what women will do so that they can progress and get recognition in an environment. And it kind of adds into this ideology of, well, I was tough enough to succeed. That's not something you should be proud of. If you were tough enough to succeed in a poorly structured learning environment and everyone else failed, that's great, but really you're just testing your ability to handle abuse. And that's not a healthy mindset to have. We should be working towards saying, oh, yeah, that wasn't a healthy way for me to train, and that wasn't a healthy way for me to behave. I need to change that so that other women don't have to go through the same kinds of things that I did to succeed. That's kind of where we should be focusing, I think, our efforts as female fighters. And part of that comes through adjusting, our practice structures. A lot of women take longer to warm up. They need more warm up time than some men do. So, like, okay, well, show up 15 minutes earlier. Well, that's putting the effort on the woman. Why don't you just expand your warm up section or have it more flexible? If you're doing techniques, are you looking at ways that other body shapes can learn, or are you just looking at ways that your particular body shape learns? Part of this is stuff that people need to know or work on if they're going to be leading a practice, or they would like their practice to grow. You need to set up your environment so that it benefits multiple types of people, not just one type of person. And then everyone else who isn't that type of person has to work 4 times harder to get the same result. Yeah. Representation. This is a big issue in the SCA. And I think the Leaky Pipeline paper also talks about this. Here's the thing. If women don't have representation, and I'm being a little gendered in my terminology here, so I apologize for that, but if women don't have representation and gender minority fighters don't have representation, what's the point? I mean, really, what's the point of me striving for something if I know only a certain percentage of women get that? Why would I try? Honestly, what's the point in me putting an effort to be competitive if I know that the chances of me actually getting the thing at the end are like next to nothing? I mean, and when I say representation, I'm not just talking about representation as in we should make more knights or we should make more masters of defense. That is a thing that we should be doing. That is a thing, don't misconstrue that. But I'm also talking about just women in positions of leadership, in positions of power, and authority. Are women being recognized for their efforts? Because women do a shit ton of stuff in the SCA. We really do. And the effort that's required to get to mod is we have more obstacles in the way. And so jumping over those hoops is tiring and it's exhausting. And if I'm going to go through all of that effort, and I'm not going to get the recognition, what makes you think that I would want to encourage other people to try the path as well? I've kind of touched on some of these as well. Like we often adapt to fit our environments and perpetrate masculinity. That drives other people away. I shouldn't have to be one of the boys in order to succeed. Oh, sorry, I just stopped. Okay. I saw Kiva's hand up, so I wasn't sure.
My 7-year-old is not wearing any clothes.
Oh, okay. We're good then. But like, if you're not gonna, women, we need the recognition. We need the recognition in all stages. So recognition could look like, when you're demonstrating a technique, instead of always using a guy to demonstrate the technique with you, bring in one of the female or the gender minority fighters to demonstrate the technique with you. It puts them in a position of authority, lesson demonstrations. If you have a woman who can teach something, get her to teach it. If you're at a practice, it doesn't matter if she has an award or a title or anything like that. If she's good at footwork, get her to teach footwork. If she's good at holding the line, get her to teach holding the line. Whatever it is that she's good at, get her to teach it and get her to teach it to everybody, not just other women. Because one of the issues I think that a lot of women run into, especially when teaching, is that a lot of men generally don't like to listen. I have experienced that myself, and so have many other women. There is nothing more dejecting in my opinion, than talking with someone that you're trying to run a practice about, and then they look at you when you're trying to tell them that maybe their technique, it could be adjusted in this way because it's wrong or it's just not going to work. So you're like, oh yeah, no, if you did this, that would help you do that better. And then they just kind of look at you like, oh, yeah, sure. Okay. But I read in this book that this is what it says. And that's really the technique that I'm trying to work on. And then they just bowl over you. That's disappointing. And if you ever see that happen, I think a point would be to like, actually, no, she knows her shit and you should listen because she's right. We shouldn't have to have you step in to do that, but we do. And I know that there's lots of women who have had that where men just won't listen to women. And part of that can be addressed by just having women teach more and encouraging women to teach more. We know a lot of stuff, but because of the positions we're in, because we don't get the same kind of recognition, oftentimes there is a doubt in our own ability around things. So I see Adina has a question. Are there any other questions at that time? No? Okay.
Oh, I can unmute now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute.
It's okay.
I also want to say that this goes for women with disabilities even harder. Thank you for helping me with my recovery. Lady Savia helped me with my physiotherapy by making videos on different movements to help me recover so I can continue my sword practice. But they have to push harder. and being a woman, you have to push harder as it is. And then you have a disability or a minority on top of that. And so you have to push even harder. And when does it break?
Yeah, for sure. There's a breaking point for all of us. But yeah, and when you do have a disability, like this is the other thing, I say gender minority fighters, but really like if your goal is to grow the community, you need to make your practice environment accessible to as many people as you can, whether they look like you or not, whether they act like you or not. And if you want to grow the community, you have to make it accessible. There needs to be a level of adaptation that you can put into your environment so that other people can thrive. If you don't, we just won't grow, really. If people aren't willing to change and if they're not willing to make their environment adaptable, we just won't grow. And I want to see the SCA grow, but it's not going to grow if we're not going to be inclusive. And there's so many ways that you can break down a practice. There are so many ways that you can break down a practice to make it way more acceptable or accessible to everybody, you know, to all different levels of things. I know one of the books that I read, which I found to be amazing at really sort of adapting my mindset, and that I think touches on making, you know, your practices accessible to everybody, is Kaya Sadowski's book, Fear is the Mind Killer. It's a great read. If you run a practice or if you teach anything to do with swords or armored combat, read that book, please. Read that book. If you want to continue teaching and you want to reach a wider audience, or you want to learn how to adapt to be more accessible, read that book. I think it's a really great sort of starting point for that. But yeah, representation. We need representation throughout, and that goes for things like KRM or Principality and Kingdom Rapier Marshals, and the same for Armored Combat. That goes through, you know, grant level awards. Are women being recognized for those awards? Are they being utilized in training spaces? Are they looked to as leaders within the community? Because quite frankly, even in the Principality of Tier E, I see a lot of women who are rapier fighters who deserve far more recognition than they currently have. And I see that across the kingdom. Pretty much anywhere you go, you will find women who deserve way more recognition than they have, whether that is having them run the practice instead of, you know, the master of defense or the white scarf who's been fighting for 15, 25 years. Have a woman step up and do that. Have her lead the practice. That's putting her in a position of leadership, and that's increasing her representation. And it's a really simple do. But yeah. born fighters. So I read an academic research paper on, it's called Some Women Are Born Fighters, Discursive Constructions of a Fighter's Identity by Female Finnish Judo Athletes. It's a really great read. If you have access to academic journals and stuff like that, I would look for it. Some Women Are Born Fighters. It's a really great read. They interview a bunch of female judo athletes on their experiences in judo, specifically in Finland, which is seen as a fairly progressive country, especially when it comes to gender and stuff. And judo also being a sport which is heavily advertised as being an equal opportunity sport for both genders, or multiple genders, which is funny because when you actually look at the stats, it's not the case. And we see this a lot with the SCA, as mentioned earlier. We like to talk a big game, but the action isn't there. But in it, there was an interesting thing with the athletes where the women didn't really realize how contradictory they were in the interview. They would start off by saying, yeah, there's not as many women, but I never really noticed it at first. Like everything's pretty male dominated, so I didn't think about it, which was me when I started the SCA. Literally did not think about gender at all. It was just a sword and I wanted to hit people. And I thought it was cool and fun. And it wasn't until after taking a break when I came back that I realized, oh, yeah, there is a gender difference. And there is a different way that everything kind of works for me versus for men. And there is a different way that I'm treated versus men and stuff like that. And I kind of came back into it with a little bit of that born fighter attitude where it's just like, well, I must just be tougher than other women. Obviously, like it's a pretty, you hit people with steel swords. Like I must just be built different for it. Which is not the case. I think any woman can fight rapier or armored combat. It just depends on the environment she's in. Is the environment supportive to her? I think I see this a little bit more in the armored combat community than the rapier community, if I'm being honest, though. I will be fair, though. I only fight armored combat on the warfield. That is an intentional decision on my part. So I wouldn't fully consider myself a part of that community, but it is definitely something I've looked into, and I see that with women fighters across the board in armored combat, which is that it's a tough sport, and I'm tough because I'm in the sport, and I see that with men as well. And I think that is not necessarily the best attitude to have in that environment if you want other women to join, because me being 125 pounds, 5'6", with scrawny little arms and a neck, oh, cool. So I'm just not tough enough. Awesome. That's great. That really makes me feel good, and so if that's the attitude of the sport, again, it's not encouraging other people to join, it's making it exclusive versus inclusive. And so that attitude, and I think that's kind of the hardest thing that most people in the SCA are really going to have a hard time with, is fixing the attitude of our environments to be more beneficial to other people and to be inclusive. That's why when people are like, oh, well, what do I do? And they want those specific things. And I'm like, well, you can make your equipment, better. Your steel key can be better and have more of those things. But at the end of the day, really the biggest thing you need to change is the attitude and the mindset behind how you approach your practice, behind how you approach evaluating other people for awards and for recognition. It's up here. The rest of it is very simple, but the attitude that is going to be the harder thing to change, I think, for a lot of people, because it's hard to change. I don't want to change. I just want to be comfortable and cozy and just coast along. But yeah, born fighters. Nobody's a born fighter, and if you think you're a born fighter, that's a little problematic. Not gonna lie. I'll be nice. I know Kiva told me that I could swear, but I'm trying not to. I'm zooming through this. Does anybody have questions, or the questions in the chat?
Sorry, there's a question from Rifkin. What do you do when the women who seem right for leadership don't want to be put in that role because they feel like you are only asking them because they are the minority?
Yeah, tokenism. That's, I find that, and this was mentioned in that article that I mentioned, some women are born fighters, is that women and gender minority people are less likely to believe in their own abilities. And I think that if you're looking at somebody for a leadership position, you need to ask yourself, is it tokenism? Is it just because they're a woman or a gender minority fighter? Or is it actually because of their skills? If you're looking at that, I think that's a valid question to ask yourself, because I think sometimes it's easy to look at maybe some of the women and gender minority fighters who are active and vocal and kind of be like, that person, that's who I want. They should totally get recognized for something, which is great. But then what about all of the other women who are doing the same kind of work and just aren't as vocal? Because there's a lot of us. You can't say there isn't. There's a lot of female fighters across our kingdom who deserve some level of recognition. But I think if you're looking at a woman fighter, there's maybe a conversation with her being like, no, you are badass. You are kick-ass. You're doing a lot of work. You're doing the work already. Your skill level is at this point. And so some of it might take a little bit of, I guess, persuading, if you want to call it that. Sorry. But yeah, women we're more likely to doubt our abilities. And that kind of sucks. And it takes a little bit more reassurance that we're not just being, we're not a token. Because that's also not fun. But I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
There was another question from Rotrude. I hope I'm saying that right. Can we talk about the detriment that is being overpraised, especially early on, particularly being overpraised for male traits such as aggression?
Yeah. So I find, this is kind of, I think for women, being praised for more masculine traits, that can be really hurtful to the society, but it's also kind of hurtful to the woman, I think, not just the society, because you're encouraging her to be more masculine, which may or may not be natural to her. And it could also be dangerous on the field. If you're encouraging somebody to be super aggressive, I think aggression on a field is great and it's important. But if it's not tempered with safety, that can be dangerous. I think it's not necessarily healthy, because I think that rapier doesn't have to be an inherently masculine sport. I think it is an inherently masculine sport, just in how it's been built and how the traits that are valued are aggression, it's fighting, there are injuries, and it's, heavily leadership based. Those are all viewed as inherently masculine traits, never mind the fact that women have them too. But yeah, I think that can be really not healthy for the environment, because it's still encouraging people to change themselves to fit the environment rather than changing the environment to be open to multiple types of people. And yeah, and when I say it's a detriment to women as well, women get hammered for being too aggressive all the time, but then if we're not aggressive enough, we also get hammered for that. Aggression is great for women up until a point. And so it can kind of hit us from both ends. Let's say the aggression is what gets us on the field, and it really is something that we need to display in our fights. But then you get to something like a council discussion, and it's like, oh, well, she's too aggressive on the field. Well, yeah, but so are several of the masters of defense. So what? Why is it not okay with her? But you were encouraging it at the beginning of her career. And so she followed through with that advice, and now it's hurting her down the road because you're biased. So hopefully that answered that. But yeah, I think that's a problem. We just need to be more accepting of different traits, honestly. if we're looking at it. Women can be leaders. We don't have to be aggressive. Sometimes we are aggressive, but we don't have to be. We can be feminine and we can still be strong. But yeah, I think that's kind of a thing that people miss, you know. If we show more stereotypically feminine traits, we're not viewed as strong enough or independent enough or firm enough. She's too soft to do this sport, which is just wrong. But yeah. Yeah, addressing our biases. I hope you like my little pug. I am uncomfortable. This is the hard part, honestly. It really is. And this is kind of the piece that I've been stuck on a lot. Every time I listen to a talk, every time I read something new, I realize that the biggest issue we have in our community is addressing our own internal biases. I think that our biases is what hurts women the most in terms of advancing. I have heard far too many stories of men being praised for something and then women being criticized for the exact same thing, even in the same conversation, same breath. And if you want to sit there and say you don't have biases, again, I will tell you, like I said at the beginning, that is false. You have them. You're just not willing to address them. And I think at the end of the day, that'll be the biggest harm to women in the long term, especially when they start being brought up for discussions, is those biases. I know my husband knows that I get pretty firm on this. We just had a conversation because he's looking at hiring somebody new for his work. And we had a very passionate discussion. It wasn't an argument, but it was definitely an intense one because I said, no, you're judging her based on her looks. And he's like, I'm not doing that. And now he's like, I would do the same for guys. And I'm like, really? Would you do the same for guys in every single situation? And he was like, well, my team's mostly female, so I would do that for the guys. And I'm like, oh, so are you scared that they would interrupt his workflow or that he would interrupt their workflow? And he was kind of like, oh, and he kind of kept fighting. He's like, oh, no, you're right. I'm trying to defend myself and you're right. And I said, I know I'm right. You're making a judgment based on an internal bias because you think she's pretty. You know, and that you're inferring that she'll behave a certain way because of that, not based on a resume. And we talked about doing things like blind resumes after that, you know, removing a name and not being able to look at the person's photo, because that does inform and it does allow you to make a judgment based on those things. I know I get that because my modern name is Chichietku, which doesn't look at all how it sounds. And I know for a fact that I've been denied things because of that bias, because I have a long, complicated name and people are like, too much work, resume goes in the next pile. And I think that those biases are really going to be the biggest issue for our community. I'll call you out on them though. So if you know me personally, I'll call you out in a polite and loving way. But yeah, so I think this like kind of covers it. You know, if we didn't have biases, we would have way more gender minority members of the Order of Defense and also the Knights. So I think the numbers speak for themselves in that case. But this is like 40 minutes. Okay, I'm quicker than I expected. Resources. Like I mentioned earlier, Fear is the Mind Killer by Kaya Sadowski. You should read that if you run a practice or you teach anybody. She also has a great blog. I couldn't find it in my browser history though, otherwise I would have posted the link, but her name is Kaya Sadowski. There is a blog for that. The leaky pipeline study that was just done. The other thing is I get a lot of people who are like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I don't know what to do. And I'm like, you know what? This is not a new problem. This has been a problem in every industry and every sport ever. Pretty much everything is male dominated. So you're gonna find information out there on how to address these things out there for other industries. I wrote a paper a year ago about addressing the gender gap in the SCA, and the resources that I pulled from were women in combat sports. This is something that's studied. I mentioned a study about women being board fighters. There was another one about undoing of gender and mixed sex martial arts practices and stuff like that, which covers things like, you know, having having, you know, mixed gender practices and such, which is kind of, for the SCA, that's something that we do anyways, and it's not a big issue, but for other areas, it's kind of a new thing. And so, you know, if you want to learn more, there are resources out there for you to take from and to pull from. There's articles that you can find in the New York Times. There's articles that you can find from Harvard. You know, like, this is not a new problem, and it's not exclusive to the SCA. And I think people maybe get wrapped up in that because the SCA doesn't have as many specific stats that they can pull from. But if this is something that you're actually serious about addressing, and you do want to help women and gender minority fighters move forward with things, you know, you got to put in some of the work yourself. You know, you can't just rely on classes like this. There is reading that you can do. You know, there are books and resources that you can access to learn about it, you know, because women have been struggling in male-dominated environments since forever. So, you know, there's research out there for this stuff. Yes.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see your hand up.
I posted this to the chat, but as somebody who's been a fighter and somebody who's been a royal, I think people forget about the power of just the simple act of writing an award recommendation. And there's certainly times that I've gone on that I have a bandwidth to write one recommendation this week, and I try to do that at least once a month, is write a award recommendation. But adding in kind of an intersectional component where it's like, is there a female fighter who I feel should get recognized? And send it. And I think if more people did, like, that's the one thing that is unique about our game, is that we have this ability to connect right with that aspect. So totally. That's one thing I would like to do from this talk. And I think if maybe more people did, maybe we could shift the letter. Yeah, we could shift the needle that way for sure.
I totally agree, because award recommendations are awesome, and they should be done way more often. There we go. I know my husband Draven and I have had lots of conversations about that, where we kind of take time to recount, you know, either how many women were at a tournament or how many female fighters we know in the kingdom or whatever it is, and to write those award recommendations out there. Because +1 to Invisible Woman book. Cool. Sorry, I got the chat open now. Award recommendations are great. And like, there's a fancy thing I mentioned earlier, was putting women in positions where where they could teach, where they were being used as examples and in demonstrations and things like that, and demos, and just putting them in places of visibility is important. And that's like a small thing that I think everyone can do in any environment, because I think the more men learn how to learn from women, the easier this process will be in terms of women actually getting recognized for their skills and talents. Because as long as men are unsure of learning from women, it makes it a lot more difficult for us to get proper recognition. There's a lot of kingdoms present here. That was kind of surprising for me, but yeah. And I'm not sure how it is in other kingdoms for award structures and stuff like that. Most of my experience obviously comes from the Kingdom of Antir and the Principality of Thierry. And I think in a lot of ways I have been fortunate because of that. But I think even though I've been fortunate, I think we still have a lot of work that can be done. The fact that we only have 2 female Maesters of Defense is kind of ridiculous. Not gonna lie, this is a polite call out on Tier. I love you, but we need to do more, because I think if people think that there isn't enough female fighters for this, I think we're kidding ourselves, honestly. And here's the other thing I want to point out, is I know in our kingdom, I can count on 2 hands the number of women in my principality that I know show up consistently and have been fighting for longer than 10 years. So just saying, you know, I started in 2012, and I'm not saying I need to be made because I took a 5-year break and stuff, and we're obviously in the middle of a global panorama. So, you know, things are paused, but at the same time, why is it that we have so few women who are being recognized, even though they've been fighting for over 10 years or 10 years at minimum? What are we not doing? And if our Masters of Defense and our Knights aren't asking, why aren't these women advancing? I think there's an issue. If you think it's okay for women to just stay in the community and get zero recognition for that long, what the fuck? Like, honestly, what the fuck? And I don't know what that is, but I'm not sure how that works. Obviously, I'm looking at being studented and stuff, but that's not something that I always have the information on. But I think I'd be doing everyone a disservice if I didn't say that publicly, because it's an elephant in the room. Yeah.
Just addressing an earlier question, I think for stuff in the SCA and for stuff that happens in politics and movements, we tend to think if we express it online, if we express it on social media, the powers that be will just see it and recognize it. And so that's where, just still circle back to award recommendations for a second. So I think they're excellent things to do, especially if you make them. Somebody asked me to kind of go over what an award recommendation is. So anybody can write them at any level. You don't need to have any kind of a title to write in a recommendation. You can do recommendations for awards for your kingdom. You can do them for peerages. And even if it's your roommate or your spouse, just identify at the start of your recommendation, this is my roommate or this is my partner, but this is what I've observed. And so if you just recognize right away, like to the people reading it, okay, like I know you have an intimate relationship, but that means you probably better than anybody else have a front seat to the work that this person is doing. So be as specific as you can. And then when you release that back to your kingdom, that award recommendation that you can do online goes to that peerage group or goes to their majesties and goes into a database. And it's so it really is an excellent, meaty way that you can do the work of getting a person recognized that doesn't make them do any additional work. So I think they're super important. I think they're undervalued. I think we forget about them. And so as somebody who tries to, to be active in the SCA, I try to write one a month. Even through the pandemic, that's sort of something I try and do at least once a month. It doesn't take, it might take half an hour to do one. Sorry.
I saw someone mention in the comments that it's not always about how long you've been doing something. And yeah, that's true. And a person after that mentioned less why aren't they advancing and more how do we equalize this? And I think that's a really great point. But at the same time, when you look at the numbers of women who drop out of these things, and then you look at the ones who do stick around, the ones who stick it out and they still get very little recognition. And I mean, I don't just mean, oh yeah, they're a great person and they do really well. My question is, do you know if they want to get to that level? Are they studented? Are they a provost? And if they are, and they have still been, like if they do want to get that award at the end, and that's a goal, and they're already recognized as leaders in the community by other people. Sorry, my cat. No. Like the fact of the matter is if you look at how many women stick versus how many men stick, it's okay for a lot of men who stick around, who just, play around and stuff, and they maybe aren't wanting to be as competitive and stuff like that. But my question is why how do I word this? Earlier on, I mentioned that it may look like women and gender minority fighters will need more help than men because the environment is structured for men. So yes, women are going to need extra help to overcome the obstacles that are put in place by the nature of the environment. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that if you're not willing to look at and give women what looks like is more help than what you would give, a male student, I don't know how, I'm not sure if my point and my ideas are coming through clearly with that, but I just think that women are going to need more help. We are, and it's because of the nature of our environment. And if you're not willing to accept that, then that I think is a problem in your teaching style. And that goes to master of defense, not master of defense, night, not night. If you're working with female fighters and gender minority fighters, we are going to need a little bit more help in some areas. And yeah, that, I don't know. I hope that makes sense. And I hope that's kind of clear, because I don't think it's acceptable for the few female fighters that stick around and do become, you know, mainstays of our environment to not be recognized for the work that they do for our community. So yeah, does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Sorry, I'm checking out the chat to see what's going on there. But yeah, are there any questions? I see some hands up.
Yeah, me? Can I? So, one of the things that in this was one that Maester Brigid said in there, which is kind of an interesting thing for me to try to figure out. It says, you're not wanting the orders to be diminished. We're asking for standards to be equal and fair. So it's the point of, because like one of my squires, Jadviga, working with her is the thing of how she says, I don't want to be treated any different than any of the others, which makes sense. And it's things that we're working on, you know, and the idea is to have that fairness and that equality when we work in a fighting community where not everything is necessarily fair and equal, because strength and speed and all that has a major effect on that. One of the things that did help was the book, The Armored Rose, working with her and talking to Duchess Elena, who wrote the book, which has been fabulous for getting some ideas and stuff. So it's a thing of, what do you consider the standards of equal and fair?
Yeah, and I think that also plays into a conversation that's being had a little bit more broadly around the difference between equality and equity, which is that some people need tall stools and some people need short stools and some people don't need a stool. Women are going to need taller stools to see over the fence because there's just more barriers in the way. So it's going to, you know, yeah, it's going to look different to everybody. And I think a lot of that does also come back to your own teaching. And it, like, a lot of my ideals and a lot of my thought processes on stuff like this go back to the individual and whether or not they're willing to address their own biases, whether or not they're willing to change, and whether or not they're willing to structure their practice in a different way, so as to be beneficial to more people. Because, you know, if you want to be a good teacher, that requires personal work, that requires personal development, and that requires you to be adaptable, and to adapt your teaching style to benefit people so that they can succeed and not just one type of person be successful.
But are you looking at that also as the teaching style? You're also saying structure your practices differently. Would you put that more as towards the group as a whole or an individual? Because to me, some of that seems more individualized to the person as opposed to the group as a whole. Because like you were saying with the warm up and stuff like that, well, at most practices you have a certain amount of time. Some people don't warm up, some people take a long time to warm up. So are you looking at more as an individual at that point then?
I look at it as both. Part of it is the group, part of it is you need to change your group mentality, and part of it is you need to change your individual mentality. And I think that goes for both, right? It's not just going to be the instructor's job to make sure that everybody changes. It's going to be the group's job to make sure that they are all inclusive, right? And that's a culture shift. And culture shifts are hard. So that's why I push it back on the individual, because if you want to change a culture shift, you have to be a part of it. you have to actively change the way you think and stuff like that so that you can influence the way others think as well. And yeah, and having a more diverse practice structure. You know, I like training in thirds. You have a 30-year practice dedicated to, you know, slow work and drills and stuff like that. And then I forget exactly, it's been a long time, honestly, since I've done any level of practicing, but breaking your practices up into thirds and then being flexible for the people who attend, because we have people coming into our practices at all different skill levels. So we should be able to adapt to that, I think.
Okay, I'm going to semi-moderate the questions because we've got 81 participants. Kushags is next. She had a question.
Cool.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a question as much as a bit of a comment. And I fully realized that I might get beat up on this. You were commenting on the necessity, the women who have been doing things for 10 years without recognition. It's not just women. I have seen men doing fighting or whatever at a decently high level for 10 and 15 years, and they don't get recognition either. This is an issue that goes beyond the gender gap. It's more visible for women, I grant you.
I see where you're coming from, and my issue with the fact is that how many Masters of Defense do we have in the Kingdom of Vontier? Does anyone know?
Oh, I thought you said female.
Overall,
gosh, I think we're up to like 26 or 28. Please don't quote me.
So we have 2 out of 26 or 28 of our Masters of Defense are women.
You can't just look at the OP because we had several move in. So you have to like curate the OP to figure it out.
Yeah. So my point being is, like, I understand that it is an issue for men, and I get that, but at the same time, there are less obstacles in the way of men for reaching these types of recognition than there are for women, which is why I focus on it more, is because the obstacles that men have in an environment that is inherently masculine and structured for their success is easier for them to progress if they choose to, versus women knowing that it takes 3 times as long for us to get the same kind of recognition that a man gets. And then also on top of that, usually the same amount of effort, or 3 times as much effort as well, to get that recognition is a little ridiculous, honestly. And so there's just more obstacles in the way for women. And the fact that we have women that stick around without recognition is, even though we have such a high dropout rate for women, it doesn't line up for me. You know, that's why I focus on the women, though, is because this is an issue. You know, men just don't have the same kind of obstacles that women have when it comes to succeeding in these environments.
Okay, next we have Asher.
Hi.
There we go. All right. So, hi. Thank you for hosting. This has been very informative. So I'm the Marshal of Lothanor, and my lady, the Murder Pixie, is a heavy fighter, and so I'm doing everything that I know how to do, and whatever I can do, to encourage women and gender minorities to fight. I've recently taken on a new young man who's only 15. Let me correct myself there. He's gender non-conforming, so I'm not entirely certain what the pronouns are, so my apologies. But anyway, and I can tell you what we've done here in Lothanor is we have done our best to make sure that we have a variety of different armor sizes, and even got a loaner cup for both genders, things and so on and so forth. But where I'm really struggling here, and the big part of my marshalate, my big thrust as the officer for Lothanor here, has been to try to encourage more people who are, not men, not male identifying, whatever, to fight. Because frankly, I don't care what you look like. I don't care if you are a man, a woman, what color your skin is, where you come from. I just want to make friends with you and hit you with a stick. That's where I come from, and I want you to try to do your best to hit me with a stick. So, and this is obviously the heavy armored combat side of things. So, where do you think that we can do a better job? As I'm a straight cisgendered male dude. I'm as majority as you get. What can I do to be that encouraging force to get people who maybe don't look like me and aren't, from my background, to come in and hit me with sticks?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. So especially when we're talking about gender minority, not just women, so we're talking about non-binary, trans, etc. The perception of how safe the environment is will heavily influence their level of participation. And there's a lot of things that I think people who fall into minority categories look for in terms of safety, and that falls into things like attitude, microaggressions, behavior. Sometimes there's these little warning flags that we get that we can't quite explain or put our finger on, but it makes us not quite feel as safe. So part of that would be watching things like language and attitude and being a little hyper vigilant in how you see women and gender minority fighters being treated in practices. Are they being talked over? Are they being shut down when they give advice in conversations and such like that? If they are, stop it. If you see someone being talked over, say, excuse me, sorry, they weren't finished. That goes a long way in saying, this is a safe place for you and I value your opinion. That'll do a lot, because it sucks to be talked over, especially when it's something that you know things about, like you are educated and knowledgeable on that. So trying to look at that thing and then squashing any kind of stupid jokes about stuff like that also goes a long way in making your environment look safe. And yeah, does that kind of help? I know those are kind of like really small things, but
it does. I think that answers the question more about what once they're there.
Yeah,
keep them
you
there.
You want to see how to encourage them to get in there, though, right?
Yeah, particularly for the folks that they're lurking on Facebook, yeah, and they don't really know how to reach out.
Visibility then. Visibility. Ensuring that the women and gender minority fighters that are attending your practice are visible if you have any. Ensuring that I do. So like, if you'll notice, I have Lady Savia, pronouns she, they. That goes a long way in signaling that that's a safe environment before they attend, if you're showing things like pronouns and stuff like that. And then like when we were having active practices, I know there are some shires around me that would do post-practice photos to show everyone who attended the practice, to encourage other people to attend if they hadn't shown up yet, but they're kind of lurking and checking it out. And that also goes a long way for visibility. If you don't have anyone who is female or gender minority attending your practice, maybe bring someone in, if you can, from a neighboring shire or barony to teach. Be like, hey, we have lady so-and-so, mistress so-and-so, or this person is coming in to teach, and highlight that individual, which kind of signals to other people that it's more of a safe environment and it's still giving that visibility to people. Does that help a little more?
It does. And just while I have the mic for just a second, I see that Lady Astrid is online, and yeah, I just want to plug Girl Squad here. It's an on-tier, awesome group of lady fighters. I guess it's Isabel's here too. I got to meet both of them a couple years ago at Ursulmus. Both just a couple of awesome heavy fighters. And ladies, I didn't forget that meeting. I want you to know that.
Girl Squad is fucking fantastic, especially when it comes to helping promote female fighters, gender minority fighters, and creating safe spaces for them. They're amazing.
I'm really glad, Lady Savia, that you feel comfortable enough to start swearing. Really
yeah, I think I was like, I did slides and I was like, I don't know, should I do slides? And then I did slides, and because I didn't want to lose my train of thought, and I think that kind of made me a bit stiff, and now it's conversational. I'm like, oh, I can talk, cool.
Okay, next we have Lady Astrid.
Yeah.
Now I'm not ready. Just kidding. No, thank you, Asher and Lady Saya for this presentation. I think part of the biggest struggle is like, yeah, like I saw in the chat somebody said like, stop asking for minorities to be the one who fix things, and it's great. Like we don't want to be the ones who just gonna be doing the work, put in the spot. And I talk with Sir Revkin about it. It's like the reason that Ilva and I want to put ourselves in the spot is because like we see ourselves as, okay, well, if nobody's going to do it, let's might as well put ourselves in the spot and somebody else to represent and in the heavy fighting community in the north. But it's a struggle, right? You want to make sure that those people don't feel the burnout, that they have to carry the heavy weight of like having to put our foot down and like, this is what I want to do. And if the people that come after us, they will have the pathway, right? Which I know that many great fighters out there who already paved the way for us, but same way, it's just like, I don't want to feel that's a token of being myself as a female fighter and be the one who will be, you know, putting the foot forward, but always have somebody else who will recognize it, have a safe environment. You already mentioned about it. That is amazing, because especially I will talk a little bit more of the heavy fighting community. Our bigger struggle was the aggressive part of it, right? Like, how I come from a background, I'm originally from Mexico, so I have a cultural background to it, that it comes with a really mental struggle and cultural struggle to overcome a lot of barriers with it, and then come to a sport that is aggressive in a way of like the environment is aggressive in the way that we like the sport is. It's you're getting hit by a stick, right? So it's a lot of the mental challenge. So on top of those barriers, there's language, there's everything that we still have to work harder to move forward. And I really appreciate, and I really want to thank those women who are paving the way for others to keep fighting and keep being part of this game, right? We forget that this is a game, that we have to enjoy it, that we have to make sure that everybody's having a good time. Otherwise, why keep doing it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It needs to be fun for everybody. And if you're facing microaggressions and you're facing doubt from other people and you don't feel safe, it's not fun, and you just leave.
Yep.
At the end of the day, like, you know, and I think especially, again, speaking kind of from Antier, I think Antier has been kind of wondering and trying to looking at our stagnant numbers and practice attendance, and our stagnant numbers are moving forward in some areas and stuff like that. And, you know, you go to the tournaments in the kingdom and you see the same group of fighters come out and you don't see any fresh faces, and then you see fresh faces, but then they're gone again. And then they don't come back. And when you start to see that, you know that your environment isn't good, because if people aren't sticking around, your environment isn't safe. Or it's not fun, one of the, or both. It's not safe and it's not fun, which is not something you want, right? So I think we really need to kind of check that stuff.
I don't know if it happens to you, but a lot of the struggle is like people want, oh, why don't you teach me how to do things? Instead of like, well, yes, like I can teach you about my culture. I can teach you about like the whole thing. But where is your effort? Where is your stand? And like say, okay, you do the research, and then I will like join you and say, like, I have a problem with that, right? That's never a struggle, but it's always that love. If you're willing to ask for it, you can also do the effort to fight for it, right? Like to do the research, learn, get all the facts, right? And then we can talk.
Exactly. Yeah, it shouldn't just be on one half of the equation to do the work. It needs to be on both half, which is why I mentioned the resources. I'm like, this is not a new issue. Gender has been a long discussed thing in many environments. So yeah.
And next is Isabel. Oh, she's muted.
Oh, I'm here.
Hi.
Hey, I didn't have a question, but I did want to sort of speak to that internal bias that you brought up. And that's definitely experience that I have had. I come from a background that is very sort of like sports oriented. Like I've always worked out, I've always done sports. And when I set my mind to something to be good at it, I work very hard to be good at that thing. And I don't care if I need to work 100 times harder than somebody else. I am going to work hard until I succeed at that thing. And heavy fighting is the first thing that I've encountered where I could not push through by working harder than the boys to be good at it.
Mhm.
And that internal bias came in when I realized that, you know, even in the sports that I've done before, that this mentality of like being one of the guys that has been my whole mentality.
Mhm.
That, you know, that I have diminished being feminine in sports,
Yeah.
that I've diminished those qualities, and I don't even want to participate in sports with women. I only want to participate in sports with men because men are better than women.
Yeah.
And when I realized that internal bias, it was hugely eye-opening, and I saw it as such a negative, toxic thing. And that was like when I first started heavy fighting. I found the other thing that I wanted to mention that really resonated in your presentation was this idea of, you know, you have to change yourself. The practice doesn't have to change for you, and the practice structure. So that internal bias led into this idea that like, I suck at this. I'm never going to be good at it because I can't change to fit this mold of this structure of the practice.
Mhm.
So the internal bias, like I think even as women, we should look at, you know, our mindset and if that's healthy or not. So I have tried to completely change that and go, no, like Astrid and I in practice, like we started doing a warm up, and it didn't matter to us if other people didn't want to do that. Like we started doing more structured practices because we needed to. Like we needed to do a practice that was actually going to help us. So yeah, I just really wanted to talk about that internal bias and that men aren't better than women. That, you know, you don't have to be one of the boys to succeed in this thing. Like you should be able to be as feminine as you want and still succeed at this thing. So anyway, that's all I had.
Well, I think that feeds really well too into like the idea that women might look like they need more help. You're talking about doing a more structured practice because the way the practices were done before didn't suit you and the way that you needed to learn. And, you know, doing things like having longer warm-ups or more warm-ups and demanding that of the practice. And if nobody's going to join, then you'll do it yourself, you know, and that's changing a structure. It's also kind of changing an attitude because people will join in. They totally will. But yeah, the internal bias one is a hard one to address because, oh, it's uncomfy. It is uncomfy. And then, yeah, I get it. I get it. I come from a sports background too, but yeah. And women will leave if they feel like it's a too masculine environment and they can't change to it. And they'll go to something that looks more feminine.
Next, we have Antonio and then Duke Paul.
Cool.
This is something that I've been always curious about as a relatively new fighter. As somebody who's gender fluid, I present both ways, but predominant, but not really having one predominantly over the other. However, given my physical appearance, I present very easily as male and passes that in pretty much any circumstance. For people in a situation like that, where they would have the ability to pass as the predominant gender, should they, and I'm trying to figure out how the best way to word this is, because I know that there's all kinds of debates in pretty much every conversation about privilege versus non-privilege and where passing fits into that. But basically, in one of these kinds of environments, should the onus be on us who can pass to pass, or in order to get social acceptance within a lot of these structures, or I'm sorry, I don't know how to word that.
That's okay. I think I get what you're going for. My belief is that you shouldn't have to change yourself to succeed. You shouldn't. I'm not saying that I don't think you should have to. And I don't think that you should feel pressured to, I think is my point. However, the environments that we have right now within the SCA pressure people to do that. And I think that that's what's wrong with the SCA and with our practices. And I think that that's a big thing that's driving people away, and that's driving, gender minority fighters away. And I get that that's a huge internal struggle for a lot of people. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm kind of like, I present super feminine, but I do like to present, androgynously if I can. But do I feel safe doing that? Will that help me or hinder me? And, these are things that people have to think about. And I want anyone who isn't a gender minority to understand that these are things that people have to think about if they're a gender minority fighter. Will being myself hinder my ability to move forward? And I don't think anybody should have to experience that. But at the same time, I do also understand that kind of the ability to present as yourself and how you want to present also depends on the safety of your environment. So I think you should probably make that decision based on how safe you feel doing that.
Thank you so very much for the perspective. I greatly appreciate that.
You're welcome. I hope it helps.
It definitely does. Thank you.
Oh, and Antonio, I just wanted to flag on just a second, I just lost it. June 20th, we're having a panel discussion on gender. The entire panel and our guest host falls under trans and gender nonconformity in the SCA. It's going to be another Trans Kingdom panel, so I would love for you to come out and share your perspectives as well, if you feel like it. That's going to be June 20th. Next, we have Duke Paul, and then I'll get to the comments and the questions. Apologies.
Cool.
Duke Paul, you're muted.
Hello, this is somewhat peripheral because it's not specifically talking about gender roles or gender treatment in the society. But my big thing right now, I've been doing this for an awful long time, and I can't fight anymore. I just teach and I write and I present. One of the real hindrances to female fighters and smaller men fighters and anybody else is the lack of proper training. I have two friends of mine that are dukes in another kingdom, and they are training one of the significant others of one of them, who is a small woman. And I look at what they're doing, and they're saying they're teaching her to fight in a way she can't possibly succeed. This particular thing of training people properly has been my focus for my entire career. I'm willing to help anybody any way I can. How do I get the word out? I mean, I've been a little shyer in the middle of the kingdom, and what can I do?
I'm not entirely sure. I think, okay, so I'm a pretty firm believer that some of the best ways to learn is through conversation and through discussions. I think that's the best way to kind of help people change their attitudes and mindsets. I mean, it's one thing for me to share a bunch of political memes and articles and stuff like that online and talk about it online, but I think it's a totally different thing when you can actually have a conversation with somebody about training and training ideals. And so, and I think that kind of discussion helps, and talking to people about, hey, like I heard that, maybe training this way is different, or this body type benefits better from these techniques and stuff like that. And opening that discussion with people who are teaching might be a good way to go about that. But I honestly, I don't have a straightforward answer, but
I'm sorry. I was hoping you did.
That's okay. The other option is just be unapologetically bold about it. I mean, that's always a choice, is just say fuck it and go for it.
I have no trouble telling somebody that I think they're doing it wrong. It's just, how do I get that conversation? That's the thing.
I look for openings. I'm also, so I'll be totally honest, I'm terrible at social cues. So sometimes if I have a point to make, I will just say the thing and I really don't care who's there. So if you see the opening, take it.
Well, being in my study for the last year or so, I don't get many openings.
Okay, well maybe make some openings. Obviously, we're in the middle of all of this. So openings for me right now is social media, and that's where I talk about stuff right now.
Yeah, I'll have to enlist somebody who's adept at that to set me up a little bit, I think. So thank you for the idea. And I really love this presentation.
Awesome.
It actually, this has been one of my real concerns forever, but you put some topics there that I hadn't quite considered in that way.
Awesome.
And
I'm glad.
so good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, I realized, Enzio, you have your hand raised, but I think we should go back to the chat for a second, and I'll just read out some of the questions. Does aggressive language, for example, kill them versus hit them or strike them, play a role in making an atmosphere less or more or less welcoming?
I'm not sure, actually. That's not something I've thought about. Okay, and like in my area, kill them and get them is like pretty common with a lot of the female fighters, and it's encouraged as like a, yeah, like look at her, she's ferocious kind of a thing. And so it's seen, at least in my area, it's seen as a fairly positive thing. So that might just depend on your environment. I think that strike them is a really great, term versus kill them, and maybe it depends on how familiar you are with the people you're talking with and using those terms with. Because strike them versus kill them goes from professional to very personal. Maybe gauge the terms you use based on whether you feel like you should be more professional in the environment, or if you feel completely comfortable just being, expressive.
Another question we have is, how can we in Ontario contribute to communication and camaraderie between Rapier and Rattan communities? I come from the big war kingdoms like Pennsic, and like those communities are melded through a common goal. Out here we have so little overlap. What can we do to help our companion communities?
You know what, that's another question. I'm not entirely sure on off the top of my head. I know that I think a lot of that bridging in Ontario at least happened before I joined, with some of the armored combat fighters and knights and people in positions of leadership and respected individuals made the bridge from armored combat to Rapier, and then vice versa. So now we see a lot of play over between, Rapier and armored combat, and it's a little more friendly. But I know it hasn't always been that way. And my understanding is it started with people in respected positions of leadership, starting that and making it cool.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Godric, who asks, can you give an example of microaggressions you see more often in the fighting culture of the SCA? I always find it's hard to give examples of microaggressions.
It is, because sometimes microaggressions are a feeling, and sometimes it's hard to put them on, but I'll say the most obvious one is hit them harder. That's not helpful in any way, shape, or form, and it is dangerous. But just hit them harder. Yeah, if I could hit them harder, or if I could hit them, I would hit them. Because a lot of the times when you see those kinds of issues, it's usually because someone's just overly aggressive towards you in a fight. And as such, it is not safe for you to actually land a strike on them because they're too aggressive. So that's not helpful. Or there's an unmatched skill level between the fighters, in which case hit them harder is not beneficial whatsoever. Other than that, I'll give two examples that I have personally experienced. I was at a practice. I get comments on my footwork and compliments on my footwork. It's decent. It's pretty all right. There's some always work to be done on footwork, in my opinion. And there was discussions on teaching footwork to another group. And my name was brought up and suggested, and then it was very quickly talked over within the same breath to ask somebody else, who is a man. I was the only female present. That would be a microaggression. It's a simple talking over and looking over me for somebody else who, yeah, they are skilled. I'm not going to say they aren't skilled, but the fact that I was a suggestion and then I was just completely ignored as a suggestion, and somebody else said, oh, well, what about this person? You could teach it. That's a good example of a microaggression. Another one is just kind of a look of doubt when you give advice on something. I have given advice on things where I say, hey, do you mind if I tell you something? And they go, yeah, sure. And I tell them, and then they quickly talk over what I just told them and explain why it doesn't work. Like,
Not cool.
Not cool at all. That's a terrible feeling. And in which case I'm like, okay, cool, you're an asshole. I'll go somewhere else. You don't want my advice. You keep failing. It was good advice, but you can suck. Have fun. And then usually they take it from a man. They'll get the advice later on in the practice or later on in the week from a man and be like, hey, this cool thing works. And I'm like, yeah, it does.
Yeah. There's an absolutely excellent comment here from Sir Andres Nantier, and I just say how much I love this, and this could be a tectonic shift in heavy fighting. He says, how many armored fighters stop fighting because they feel they will never advance towards knighthood because they don't hit hard enough? My 3 female squires all say they have problems getting male fighters to acknowledge their blows. I strongly believe the problem is not that they hit light, but that the game is skewed towards bigger, stronger males, dictating the level of power generation necessary to call a blow good. Perhaps we, the chivalry, need to give hard thought to changing the baseline for a killing blow being based on strength and instead use skill as the baseline. If the opponent strikes you with a clean, well-delivered blow, it means they beat your defense and perhaps you should acknowledge it.
I love that. I kind of avoided talking anything about armored combat. Just because I think they're easier to rag on, if I'm being completely honest. They're further behind the Rapier community when it comes to inclusion and diversity. And again, that is reflected pretty solidly in numbers and participation and ideologies and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree. Also, I will admit that lots of times men just won't take blows from women and they will put it underneath the guise of they didn't hit hard enough, even when they did hit with sufficient force. So there is also that internal bias and misogyny to deal with.
Absolutely. Enzia, you've had your hand up for a long time. Did you have a question?
It's more of a comment, and it's something from a leadership position. People who don't know, I'm the landed baron of the baron I live in, and a master of defense. Mm-hmm. And this is just calling up other people for bad behavior, because something that happened to me when I was of lower ranks, and one of the things that drives me crazy, and you should always call people out with it, all my students happen to be female, just happen to be. But I have found many times I'll be talking to one of my students, and somebody will come up and talk to me and not acknowledge the person I'm talking to. This happens a lot with rank in the SCA too. But make sure you call whoever the transgressor is as a leader in the community. You should always say, "Oh, have you met Lady Madalena?" Mm-hmm. And I often don't even say my student. I just say Lady Madalena, mm-hmm. and that way everybody feels more welcome, and it doesn't become a upward facing suck up fest, and that's never good.
Yeah.
And to comment to Duke Paul, who's been teaching way longer than I have in the SCA, I am, like I said, a master of defense. I do not have a typical body type for a fencer. Mm-hmm. I am a very large man, and my students tend to be not my same body type, and I loudly proclaim I don't want to teach anybody how to fight like me, because there are very few fencers who look like me. I want to teach you to fight like you.
Yeah.
And that is the best way. And sometimes I'm an ass about it when I see somebody trying to teach 6'4" lanky guy technique to somebody who is not that.
Yes. Yeah, there's things that just won't work if you don't take the body that you're teaching into consideration. It just doesn't work. I see Jed has his hand up.
Hey, Gigi.
Hi.
So this is something that I've been thinking on. I haven't really been as directly involved in the SCA for a couple of years now, but I've been fringe participating for probably 6 or 7. Do you think perspectives towards gear, as sort of we have, for some reference, me and another guy who's in the class run a HEMA school, or now I run the school, he screwed off somewhere else. Do you think perspectives to gear, similar to, like, to use the example of my own school, Lynx, we say you can never gear up too much, gear to the level you are comfortable with fighting in. Do you think that would help in an SCA context for allowing more people to be more involved? Because I know I heard it a lot when I was involved in both Rapier and Heavy, that people were wearing too much gear. They either wouldn't feel shots, or they were just kind of being wussy. And I know this isn't a problem we've ever had within Lynx, within my sphere of HEMA. People not being able to feel shots because they aren't wearing enough gear. People should gear up to the level they're comfortable fighting with, at least according to our standards. Do you think that would help in your context?
I think maybe. I think when people do that, there also needs to be a conversation around how much gear you are wearing. And I love seeing that in list fields when we are participating and then someone announces before the tournament starts, hey, I'm wearing extra chest protection. If you hit me, please tell me. I might not feel it. It's new. I'm learning, or I'm adjusting, or whatever, you know? And I think that helps with the community in terms of just communication, because the communication is important anyways. Yeah. But also, if you have a gender minority fighter who's coming into an environment and this is a violent combat sport, and you know injuries are going to happen, or you know that you bruise easily, but people should feel comfortable wearing what makes them feel safe. You know what, as time goes on, they may armor down, they may armor up, you know, whatever it is, you should figure that out. But
yeah, like you'll find the pieces of gear that you find you need. For instance, I know some people within Lynx wear fencing pants, other people don't.
Yeah, and you know what, I used to wear chest protection for a long time, and then I realized, you know what, I actually don't need chest protection for the way I fight. Nobody hits me in the chest except for Gustav.
Yeah, that guy.
One person, or Guido underneath in the. That's not the chest. That's the stomach. But yeah.
Also wanted to mention, Ro was in here. She really enjoyed most of the talk. She had to duck out early, so just want to let you know that.
Awesome. I'm glad she was able to check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, keep it up. That was kind of thing. If I have any thoughts, I'll put my hand up again.
Okay.
We've got a question. Can we talk about the missing stair problem in the SCA? I understand that it is a difficult subject to bring up, or topic to bring up.
Yeah, people don't like calling people out. Since the pandemic has started and we have stopped pretty much anything related to the SCA, I find that I myself have become much more comfortable in who I am. And I'm much more comfortable having difficult conversations than I was a year or two ago. And I think that more people should work on that, because here's the thing. Missing stairs are the people who make things unsafe, and they're the people who make things not fun. And if you're not willing to remove the missing stair or fix it, you're going to continuously have dropout. It's kind of like having a bad manager, honestly. If you're like, oh, I don't know why there's such a high turnover, check your manager. You know, like everybody knows why there's such a high turnover, except for the people who don't want to address the issue. And if you're not going to address it, then you're just making an unsafe environment, honestly. You just are. You're not making it fun. You're not making it safe. You're going to have turnover.
It was my question. So one of the things I got in the comments was, what is the missing stair? And you can Google the missing stair. It's actually a very specific blog post. And it talks about, for those who are unfamiliar with the phrase, the missing stair, it talks about how when you go into a group and it's a new group and you're like, oh, hey, watch out for so-and-so. They're kind of a problem and we don't include them in these things or whatever because of this, but like we don't tell them to go away. Or watch out for so-and-so, he might say this, but like it's just that person. It's okay. We all know who they are and that's fine. It's not fine, actually. And we're now starting to be able to say, we don't say that here. We don't do that here. And it's not okay for you to continue to be that person. And so the context of asking, about the missing stair is, if you're unfamiliar with it, go look up that blog post, because it's a really good blog post, but it's a concept that we started incorporating in other groups. And so, it's a good thing if we get other buy-in from other people who are powerful enough to have that voice to say, yeah, you're not cool. It's not cool for you to keep hitting on every new woman who comes in this group. You're making them uncomfortable. Like, you can't, like, you wait for all the girls to get drunk and then you try and take them back to your camp. No, that's not okay. And and a lot of times these are people that we have for a very long time harbored in the SCA and made comfortable and just made accommodations for. And those accommodations are what the missing stair is about.
Yeah. And she mentioned a really great phrase, which I absolutely love, which is great for calling out poor behavior and behavior that you do not want to encourage in your environment, which is, we don't say that here, or we don't do that here. It shuts people up real quick. Another great thing is if people make an offhand comment or a joke that isn't funny, or that is degrading to, gender minority people or different people of different ethnic backgrounds, is, I don't get it. Can you explain that? And watch them fumble. And then they will very quickly realize that that is not acceptable behavior in that environment, and do it as many times as necessary. We don't say that here. We don't do that here. I don't get it. Could you explain that? Those are great for microaggressions.
Awesome. I do notice we have several female knights, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I was wondering if there was anyone, or maybe some female orders of defense that would be interested in sharing their perspectives or their journey, and have any advice for the women coming up the ranks, or gender minority people coming up the ranks that could use some advice.
So I have a totally different perspective than most of the people on here. I read these stories that people have, and I realize that I had it really good. I've had very few negative interactions with people on the field. I started fighting in 1990. I joined the SCA. The people I started fighting with helped me get armor together. They were super encouraging. From the get-go, I traveled with a ton of different people. We went to different fighter practices. I never had problems with people working with me. My problem had nothing to do with the community around me. It was all in myself who was the problem. I held myself back. It was nobody else but me who held myself back. I also developed serious knee issues early on. So when I started fighting, I was in my mid-20s. By my early 30s, I had severe knee problems, but I refused to give up fighting because it's the only time, really, honestly, my knees didn't hurt, because I had so much joy in the fight. In 2015, when I was 49 years old, I had both my knees replaced. I came back after knee replacements. And during that time, and all that time that I was fighting, I always had wanted to be a knight, but I knew I was not putting in the energy I needed to be a knight. And I don't mean that I wasn't, fighting super hard and going overkill with what the guys were doing. I just knew what all my male friends were doing before they got knighted, and I wasn't doing half the stuff they were doing. So I knew that I wasn't putting in the work that I saw my male friends doing. But when I was recovering from my knee, before I had my knees replaced, one of the things I decided was I was going to come out strong after my knee replacements. So I invested the time in doing my Pell work every night. I didn't miss a night of doing Pell work for 2.5 years before I got knighted. And I'm not talking about investing a ton of time. That took me 10 minutes every night. It's just the dedication that made the difference, and the mindset that I had when I went into the fighting or into the Pell work, and what my goal was. When I finally got back to the actual fighting field, all I wanted to do was have fun. And it was the joy of becoming a better fighter. Knighthood was way far in the distance for me, because I really just wanted to have fun with my fighting. And I traveled a ton. I did the Shiv hunt, which probably was the best thing that I ever did. And the reason why is I took myself out of my comfort zone, and I had to go ask people I didn't know to fight with me and have them sign the book. And they all would say
not only would they tell me what I was doing wrong, but they told me what I was doing right. And I think that was the key, is that I not only had, here, you need to work on this, but you're doing this right. You're doing this correctly. Wow, this was a really fun fight. And it was the positives that were mixed in with the negatives that really gave me the confidence to really continue fighting. So, and then when they offered me knighthood, I was totally blown away. I didn't think I was even close to it. I can honestly say I would have never stopped fighting regardless if I ever got knighted or not, because I love to fight. And that's what drives me, is the pure joy of fighting. My advice to most people out there, regardless of their gender, is fight because you love to fight, and never forget the joy of the fight. The rest of the stuff is just extra. It's what you do when you're out on the field and the joy you have and the smiles it brings. That's the important part. So that's my story.
Wonderful.
Oh, and I'm from Artemisia, and I'm Kelwyn Ratslayer.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. That was amazing. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share from a peer's perspective?
I don't know if maybe I could leap in.
Absolutely.
So I'm Sir Kira. I am out of Avical, which is, up in the Canuck land here. So for a reference for a lot of folks, I'm about 125 pounds and 5'4". So if anybody has anything about your size, it don't matter. So yeah, there you go, to all of the small folks out there. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Big things that I had to learn along the way was learning to trust that. So I ended up with a lot of bad advice as I went along, because a lot of people couldn't translate mechanics and basic fighting styles to a smaller body type, I noticed. And so, because we have a lot of really big, really proficient guys here. So it took a long time for me to trust my ability to take the information that I was getting and then be willing to play with it, and then have somebody that I could work with. A couple of people, actually. Avical's quite good in this, to try things out until I figured out how it worked. And that was probably the biggest thing that I would love to push forward to people is have faith to play. Also have the ability to say, you know what, thank you, but you don't have to listen to all the advice that ever comes your way, because a lot of it really doesn't translate not particularly well. So for example, in other things, if I swear to God, things that make me laugh, get stronger now. So for example, I've altered my equipment. It's lighter. I sacrifice the fact that my durability isn't going to be as good, but that's okay. So I replace shields more often than most people. One thing that was sort of particular that came out, especially just around my knighting, is that because I'm not strong and I'm not particularly big, I can't cheat my shots. So my mechanics have to be fairly well on. So don't tie your success rate necessarily to your skill rate, right? Wait, that makes sense to your win. Your wins don't necessarily make you successful. So my success rate probably doesn't match a lot of the guys who, if they don't maybe necessarily throw a shot perfect, can probably power it through. And I had to come to grips with that. So, but I don't want to use it as an excuse. What it is for me is just another level for me to perfect my skill, work on my technical, and running away is a completely legitimate strategy. Completely. So in particular, if you're a small fighter, don't get in your head about it. Don't get too worried about the big folks that are out there. Feel free to play. Technique is going to be your savior, so definitely work on your skill. Speed is awesome, and having allies is good. If you can find a training partner who can work with you, where you have no ego and is willing to play with you, who can give you good feedback. And I guess, you know what, here's the last thing before I ramble on too far, was something that had happened to me long ago, was the aspect of overpraise. So I would have issues where you'd go out and you'd have practice, and you'd have me and 3 other new fighters that are there, and we would all do the same thing. And for whatever reason, I'd get, I'd either, was allowed to have a kill on a lighter shot, or my technique wasn't really as great, but I'd have people come up and say, oh, that was really awesome. And I totally respect that they were trying to be supportive. But then I'd get into a tournament, and tournament brain's a lot different. And tournament brain, you're out to win, because that's a tournament. That's what you should be doing. And I'd get my ass handed to me. And my first one, I was just in tears, because I'm like, why do these guys, take my shots in practice, and then I get to tournament and they're beating the ever living tar out of me? So I had to go back to the guys at practice especially when I was new, and said, if you will not take the shot in a tournament, do not let me take it here.
Mhm.
And that forced me to really work on my skill. So it's a hard thing to do because you really have to take responsibility for your own progress, but it'll help in the long run in the sense where you get into a tournament and then the guys are gauging on you consistently at all times.
Mhm.
So those
I
are the
love
big
that.
things I would put forward.
Can I just touch on something?
Sure.
Yeah, don't coddle women in
Oh my
practice.
God, no.
You,
God,
like,
that drives me absolutely crazy.
because it plays into the idea that women are less than, and that because they're women, they are not as good as men. And they will continue to not be as good as men if you do not train them properly.
And
If
I'm
you
not
wouldn't, right? Yeah, if you're, that's okay. If you wouldn't do that with a guy, why would you do it with a woman?
Which is precisely why I'm actually against female attorneys, to be honest. I know that there's a lot of mindsets on that,
Mhm.
but in my opinion only, segregation does not mean equality. So I want us to all play together. This is the most equal and involved thing that I've ever done, and I don't want to lose that.
I find, yeah, and the female attorney thing is like, I think there's a lot of mixed ideas on whether it should or shouldn't be a thing. And I remember talking with someone about that. And I said, if there's going to be a good attendance, I think it's good. And I think it's a good way to maybe get more women involved to start, as it's viewed as a slightly safer environment, but it shouldn't be the norm. It shouldn't be the standard, I think. But if that's what it takes to see more women fighting and to see more women start to feel safe fighting and to feel comfortable fighting, I think it's awesome to highlight that. But I don't think it should be a standard.
I think, can I just add to that real quick? I also think that having practices where women, we've had a couple of women's meet and greets, and I think those have gone a lot further than just the tournament, because it makes more of a environment where you're interacting and sharing, whereas a tournament can turn into who's the baddest of the day. And a meet and greet is more about, let's come together and talk about what it's like to fight as a woman and what tips we can give you for whatever, for the right cup to wear or whatever. Those environments, I think, work better than an actual tournament.
I actually, you know what, there was something I missed that I didn't touch on, and that was around creating environments and support groups for women around fighting and stuff like that, an environment where women can talk to other women who are fighting, because we have a lot of shared experiences. And I think there's a lot of advice and knowledge that gets missed or doesn't get passed around the same way, because our experiences are so different from men, but our environments are so dominated by men that we just, I think there's a lot of stuff that could be learned from having more support groups or networks or, meet and greets, like you said, where women can talk to women about, or gender minority people can talk to gender minority people about what they go through and what helps and what doesn't help. And, sorry, Brigid,
I know I was hopping up and down in the video. I don't know if you can see me, but it was ridiculous, and I apologize. So I am Maester Brigid, and I run the Lady Rapier tournament at Penzic along with my co-conspirator, Master Illidor. And we have been running this on and off for a very long time now. And I, for the longest time, actually hated the tournament, and I was not super quiet about it for a wide variety of reasons. And a lot of it comes down to how we were treated at Penzic for running it. And the Lady Rapier tournament had gotten hijacked by a male-dominated group. And then it turned into this weird tourney circuit thing for a while. And we took it back over because we realized it was a very exploitable demographic, if you will. And so I had a lot of feelings about it, because I felt that, we didn't necessarily need gendered tournaments. And as we've taken the tournament back at Penzic, it has went from 10 people showing up to the tournament to over 60 people sometimes, usually in the 40s, but we've got people who show up. And part of that is because they want to see who's made it. They want to know who represents them. They want to get a chance to fight the women who've you know, made it as far as they want to make it, and they want a chance to fight them and then say, hey, afterwards, can we do pickups? Can we learn?
Yeah.
When Illidor originally was running it back in the early aughts, late 90s, we were running it as a meet and greet, as a prize tourney, as a social thing, and then after we'd have a big round robin, we'd have just a knockdown badass round robin to show the end fight. And that's to this day how we still run it. We run a very large meet and greet style event, which is very round robin-y. We encourage a lot of fighting. Sometimes my mom even bakes cookies that I take with me to the tournament and share with everyone. And then we have a giant final Sweet 16. And we actually get just a really amazing fighting out of it. And afterwards, even though I've really disliked the tournament idea of it being segregated, over the years, I've had lots of women who have come up to me and said, hey, I really enjoyed this tournament. It felt like I had a place. It felt like I was seen. And so I continue to run that tournament specifically for the people who have come up to me and said, hey, I felt like this was important to me. I felt seen. I felt represented. I felt like this was a good way to break the ice with people I was otherwise too shy to walk up and say hi to or get to know. And so it's kind of turned into a thing. And then people ask me, hey, you run this thing at Penzic, would you run it at locally? And I was like, no, under no circumstances would I ever run this locally, because then it turns into this weird tokenism, like, oh, it's the girl thing now. And that's not what we want it to ever be. But what we do make sure at Penzic, when we have such a large field, you know, we make sure to move people to meet people from other kingdoms as much as possible, separate people out, and it's turned into a thing that's very much supported and loved by people. And so I've come back around on it, and I now kind of support it, but only for the big wars. So there's that. So I didn't know if there are any comments on that. I did want to also say hello. I'm Maester Brigid, and I would also give my background if you were interested.
Yes.
Okay. So I started the SCA in 1994. I was a teenager, and I started fencing when I was also still a teenager, and I'm an only child, and I come from a place of privilege, right? And so it has never occurred to me to understand people at that point in my life that did not have the same privilege or the same ability to go to events, or the same ability to go and fight as I did, or the same ability to just walk up to people and say, hi, I'm Brigid, let's fight. And I've always had this very assertive attitude, this very, I'm going to go out and not be ignored attitude. And so within 4 years, I made what is the white scarf equivalent in the Middle Kingdom, because I was able to go out and just do that. And one of my biggest hurdles, however, was that I didn't have cohesive training. And so I would go up to people who would beat me, and I'd say, how did you beat me? Show me what you did, teach me. And I would go out of my way to travel a state or two away just to be like, you beat me this one time and I was really impressed by you. Can you train me? Will you teach me what you do? And so I had this very hodgepodge of training, and a very strong can-do attitude that can only take you so far, but not take you so far as to not get injury. And so one of the things I found at Penzic one year was that we were hosting this, Maester Lilius of the East was hosting this panel of women in Rapier. And what I found was that we had 3 different generations present. We had the generation who were like, Title IX, I will not be told I cannot fight men. I will not be told I cannot fight whoever the heck I want. And I've always been really proud to know those women and really proud to understand that. But to me, that wasn't the same generation I came up in. You know, I'm a baby Gen Xer. I grew up in the era of you can do anything you want. You can do anything a man can do. You just have to try really hard. You just have to try harder and keep trying harder. And so we would fight like the men fought. And then we wondered why we had so many knee injuries or shoulder injuries or so much tennis elbow. And we weren't teaching each other how to actually fight with our own bodies. We were teaching each other how to fight like men fought.
Mhm.
And so a lot of us are now facing long-term injuries and chronic injuries as a result. And we also had a big problem with the adrenaline dump because boys don't cry, so we shouldn't cry, which was super toxic AF because boys can cry and we can cry. Everyone can cry. It's normal. It's just biology. It's just water. It's fine. It's harmless. But we didn't know that, right? And so we had so many problems dealing with that. And so the third generation, which was present, we had several millennials present, and they were like, yeah, none of that's good. Women's bodies are different. Crying's okay. And like, y'all need to like calm the fuck down. And so we were like, oh, really? Okay, cool. And so that was the first time I realized that there are different generations of how women approach sports in the modern world and how that transferred into the SCA world.
Mhm.
Like, if I'm gonna fight in the real world, like, or do a sport in the real world, I don't want a boy to see me cry. Like, that's just not gonna happen. And if a boy can do something, I can do it, right? And what came to my realization, all 5 foot, nothing of me that weighed 95 pounds when I started fighting, I don't weigh that now. Now as I get into my middle-aged years, I'm like, wow, I have a lot of chronic injuries and it's difficult, like, right? So I'm very happy to see that we have a new, much healthier generation approaching the fighting community from both the modern sports world and how our hobby basically is just a filter that covers how modern society is.
Yep.
And coming back into a lot of things that you touched on earlier, which is bias, like unconscious bias. I've had a lot to learn and I still have a lot to learn, right? And so a lot of times early on in my career, when people would say, someone would come up in circle and I was an early 20 something in circle and I'd be like, well, I could make it, why can't they? And a lot of that has come around to tell me that when I'm in circle, I need to make sure that I'm not being unfair to people who do not have the same privilege or the same background or the same difficulties and other people who have these microaggressions or difficult biases or outright bigotry against them. Those were things I had to learn along the way. And I didn't understand as I was advising the Crown early on versus how I can advise the Crown today.
Yeah.
And so it's important for people in circles, in these peerage circles and other circles, to understand that they need to continue to grow. They need to continue to expand how they view the world and what they can do to make it a better place.
Totally. Learning is a lifelong thing. Guido, I saw you put your hand up.
Yes. So I'm Master Guido, and when it comes to the establishment in rapier combat, I am it. I've been around since the very beginning of on-tier rapier combat. I am the dinosaur in the room. And I'd just like to say, I've seen a lot of positive changes over the years. I've also seen a lot of sort of stagnant fail to grow over the years, which is somewhat upsetting for me. But the most important thing that I think any instructor has to understand is that what you teach is not necessarily what the other person can learn. And sometimes you have to modify that. And a lot of your students are not willing to stand in class and say, I don't understand what you're trying to get me to do. And therefore it becomes important for an instructor to make themselves available after a class to clarify or modify that instruction as necessary for whoever is required to have that clarification or modification. I've heard a lot of people say that aggression is important in rapier combat, and I will say it absolutely is not, even though people will accuse me of being an aggressive fighter. And yes, it appears that I'm aggressive, but I'm also analytical. I throw myself into the combat when I see the advantage is mine. And that's not aggression. That is focus. And I will say that saying to somebody to be more aggressive is not correct. People should just be more focused and understand when they have the advantage and to press that advantage. That's a much better way of putting it. I think aggression actually is detrimental because you fail to actually understand what's happening around you when you suddenly become extremely aggressive. I find the aggressive fighters very easy to defeat because you just let them burn themselves out. But I also like to say that, Savia, this is an excellent course. I think you've done a very good job, and I think I'm done. Thank you
very much.
I would like to touch on what Guido just said with aggression, actually.
Sure.
Because a lot of times women are told, be more aggressive.
Yeah.
What that is what that's code for is be more confident.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of aggression actually is just, you are confident and have good skill. You have confidence and you have good technique. You have confidence to have presence on the field. And a lot of times what we do in our communities is we erode confidence in women. We do not give them the ability to build up that confidence. We don't give them that ability to make themselves strong and stand tall with that confidence. And so what that turns into is you're kind of timid on the field. You need to be more aggressive. That doesn't mean just charge in and hit harder or hit more. What that means is we need to give you space and time to feel like you have a place here and that you have a good place on the field to build your own confidence. And show us you have confidence, because confidence is everything. Confidence is what wins you fights.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between aggression and confidence, right? And I think a lot of people just default to use aggression in place of confidence when really you need to be firm in your technique and stuff. I'm going to answer a question that I saw in the chat, which was, if we were to take actionable things from us tonight, what would you ask people to do? I would ask that I mean, and again, we're in the middle of a time when we can't really attend a practice and stuff, but I would ask that people take time to analyze your practice. How is it structured? What does it look like? Who are the people attending and who are the people leaving? Who's sticking around, who's leaving? Just kind of take time to look at your environment and actually analyze what your environment looks like and who is it supporting? Who are the people who stick around? Because I can guarantee you there is a type of person that sticks around. And you might have a person who doesn't quite fit that mold stick around, but they're going to be like a token. They're just the one person, which I mentioned earlier, which was like the born fighter, the one who's like, I can do this. And then look to adjust your environment from there. Really simple thing, make sure you have the equipment for a variety of body types. Prep your steel key, prep your armor, everything. Make sure that you have stuff that is there for a variety of body types, because if you're not prepared to have gender minority fighters, you're not going to have them. You need to be prepared and then they will come. Build it and they will come. So make sure your environment is stocked for multiple body types. And then look to see where you are seeing the drop off, who's dropping off and stuff like that. So just kind of take some time to pay attention to things like that. And then the other thing, which is a little harder to do because those are things that are simple, is to address your own biases. Catch yourself when you say something that is heavily gendered. Catch yourself when you say something that is not accurate. You know, if you wouldn't say it for a guy, why would you say it for a girl? Things like that. And try to work on catching your own language and your own thought process. And again, that's a harder thing that requires personal work and development, and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be a longer process. But I think that's really the foundation that needs to change, so that when we have everything prepped in our environment, the mentality matches. Because just because you have a lot of women attending your practices doesn't mean that you're succeeding. So that's what I would do. Cool.
So one thing that I'm gathering from this, and this again, like, it comes back from like my experience in SCA, but from what I've heard is rather broad, and even just reading in the chat here, would a good place to start for a lot of people just be having structured practices?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you don't have a structured practice, you're not going to learn very much. You just,
like, I know as far as I'm concerned, if you don't have a structured practice, you don't have a practice, you have a sparring day.
Yeah. And you don't learn much from sparring days. If you don't practice the technique that leads up and then have time to apply the technique that you just learned, you're not learning a lot.
No one cares who wins practice.
Yeah, you can't win practice, bro.
Too many people who care who wins practice, and that's an issue.
Yes.
And another one, I know that we've talked about it personally quite a bit, is the idea of calibration and just that communication with your training partners.
Yeah,
Does that have a, that would probably be a good thing too.
Of calibration, and I know
And it doesn't happen on the field.
No, it doesn't. I like calibration because it allows you to check in with your partner. And if you, because here's the thing, I know that you're going to get hard hits. We are fighting with weapons, and I'm talking obviously specifically for like rapier. Like, I know that happens. Injuries are going to happen. It's a combat sport. But if you can prevent the injury. And part of that is communicating, where it's like, hey, you know what? You're striking really hard. Let's dial it back a little bit. And if you have a conversation beforehand to say, is this okay for you? Is this an acceptable amount of pressure for you? You know, and you do that back and forth and you test to go, yeah, that's not too hard. Cool. You aim for that. And then you have a standard set. So when you go above that, you can dial it back down to that. And I think that helps create a safer environment.
I'd like to further expand on that idea. It defends you because no one can say, well, we didn't agree.
Yeah.
If someone hits you harder, you can say, no, that's not what we agreed on. It's not just, well, I think that we were going harder. Well, like, no, we tapped each other a bunch, said, this is how we're going.
Right. And it's so
and you
easy
can
to get
always
amped
come back
up.
to it.
It's so easy to get amped up in fights if you're, especially if you're going full speed, you know, and if you're in a practice, I don't really think you should be doing most of your practice at full speed.
If you're doing most of your practice at full speed, it's a matter of who's winning the practice. It's not a matter of your training.
That goes into winning. And if you're not fighting full speed, you shouldn't be hitting hard. So yeah, I see Guido has his hand up, and then there's a few other people as well.
On the structured practice thing, I cannot stress structured practices are the single most important thing to success. One of the biggest issues I have, having run practices for a long time now, is the groups of people who sort of decide they don't want structured practices and just want to show up and fight. And the SCA being what it is, I can't tell them they can't be there because that's wrong. So forming a small structured group that's still going to do the structured practice off in the corner is the only answer I get, which becomes difficult to do. But if you persevere and keep trying and keep pushing for this, eventually they do come around and it becomes a much more structured situation. But with a structured practice, it's really, really important to read the group and understand what they want, and also to sort of move around who's doing the teaching. Because for the students and the instructors both, a single person teaching all the time becomes just horrible. Yeah. The teacher gets burned out, doesn't care anymore, loses interest. And the students start to say, oh, he's just flapping on about this shit again. I've heard this before, and they wander off. So change the instructor on a really regular basis, if at all possible. And when it comes to calibration, honestly, the SCA Rapier combat is supposed to be to the touch, so I don't understand why there should even be an issue of calibration. If they felt it, it was good. Done. The number of people have asked me when I hit them, did you hit me? Did you feel it? Well, yes. Then yeah, I must have. So yeah, it was good.
Tipped off my mask. What?
Yes, my favorite line. I'm sorry, that tipped off the edge of my mask. Yeah, that would have been your face. You're dead. Good. Move on.
Yeah, that's great. No.
I think the calibration though is especially good for new students, because here's the thing, you are hitting people and you are hitting people at full speed. And so you need to understand what's acceptable pressure and what's unacceptable pressure. Because there's a line that you will cross. And if people don't know where that line is because they don't know what calibration is, they're going to cross it and they're going to give people injuries. I know we've all had that person out of practice who hits really fucking hard. And then we're like, hey, dude, you need to calm it back. But if you had told them what's acceptable and called it out earlier, it would have been solved sooner. So,
and that again drops onto the instructor to keep an eye on what's going on, or the instructors, preferably more than one, to keep an eye on individuals and see who's ramping it up, who's keeping it nice and controlled, and be able to not step on this, but sort of address these issues as quickly as possible. That's again falls into a structured practice situation. If you have a structured practice, these things don't slip through the cracks. You don't get somebody who suddenly is hitting like a Mack truck all the time.
Right. I know for myself, when we were still having practices, something that I would do is we would do a calibration at the beginning of practice. And I would go, I'm just going to touch you so that you know what it feels like. You touch me, so I know what it feels like. We'll do that on the mask as well. We're good. You know how that feels. I know how that feels. cool, because when you have an environment that can't be as structured, or there's a lot of people who don't, if you do that with every fighter and they start to do that, it allows them to kind of watch it themselves so that they get an idea of how that works. And that's kind of when I talk about calibration, it's kind of what I want to see in practices, is that if I don't show up and I'm kind of the lead person for most of the time and I'm waiting for someone else to kind of do that, they kind of know what to do and they know how to do it in a safe way. I saw someone, I don't know how to say your name, Ellen. You have I don't know how to say your first name, Kushag. I think you had your hand up. Yes.
My Lord Curtis in the mid-90s was working in instrumentation and made a calibration piece for SCA fighters just to see how hard we were hitting. Took it to a Crown event. We broke it.
Yeah.
You know, the guys were all having a go at it, and some of the ladies, just to see how hard we were actually hitting. I can't remember the actual figures, but it was in the hundreds of PSI, landing in a 1 inch square, 1 inch sword width. And we broke the calibrator that weekend. Might be a useful thing to have around, maybe see if there's anybody who could make that, and sort of get to the point, okay, this is what it should feel like, and maybe start having something objective like that you could say, okay, so a killing blow is 60 PSI. If you're hitting over 100, you're hitting too freaking hard.
I remember the first time I saw the meat experiment where we hung up meat and had people take sharp rapiers and thrust through or cut with the calibration that they felt was reasonable. And I almost lost my lunch the first time. I took what I thought was a normal thrust through something that had a little bit of leather on the outside and meat on the back, and just it went straight through like butter. And I was like, oh God, I'm a visual person and that's my opponent. Ew.
You don't need that much force. You really don't.
We don't.
You
Clean hard is much better.
And obviously, like, I'm not in armor combat, so I won't really speak to calibration in that arena, because that's not something I do. I do that on the warfield for fun sometimes. But yeah, I saw Merwin had their hand up a while ago. You're on mute.
Find it's once the adrenaline starts getting going, you just don't always feel the hits as much. Like something that felt good at the beginning of fighting, like once you're like amped up, more especially in war, which was actually where Merwin has had the majority of her issues with armored combat, was at the beginning. First maybe 1 or 2 encounters, everything was fine, people were being nice, the adrenaline starts getting up, everybody's kind of getting tunnel vision. And once the adrenaline gets going, you don't feel the hits as much, and you just kind of start to smash a little bit. And I've noticed that through practices. Like at the beginning of practice, everybody starts slow, you do your warm-up, you start off with like your slow work to kind of like help cement some stuff and kind of get everybody into their mindsets and stuff. And then once you start getting towards the end of practice, when you start doing your mills and stuff, and people are fighting consistently, once you're like in that fourth person in your mill, like you're kind of a little numbed to the combat, and you've just been fighting for 4 or 5 people, and then you just kind of smash a little harder. Like that's something that's super hard to control. Obviously it's something you need to, like not excusing it, but it is a natural progression of things. Even if it's something that needs to be monitored and controlled, it is a natural progression of it. At least I found with heavy combat. I can't speak to Rapier because I've been to 3 or 4 practices.
I like the idea of a PSI tool to chime in while we're unmiked, like actually measuring with PSI, because there's some times that I've been smoked to the point that I have a golf ball under my skin, and I'm like, was that really necessary? You're obviously a more skilled fighter than me. I'm a newbie. I told you that at the beginning of the tournament. Like, do you have to like really have to slam me? I'm gonna admit that I'm dead sooner than pretty much anybody else.
Mhm. Sir Kira, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. This is kind of segueing off a little bit for something.
Yeah.
This actually has something to do with how to be competitive when you've been taught to be cooperative.
Yeah.
This might be something that women have run into in the past, where you're taught to accommodate, to ensure that, we always say this, everybody has to have fun, but men seem to be better at being able to have fun and kicking ass, whereas women have a tendency to have fun and make sure that we've hosted. I'm stealing this actually from Squire Kate. We've hosted and made sure that our other opponent has had the fun, has had a good fight, and I have seen, and some have experienced, they have essentially given the fight away because of that. So learning how to get around that, and I don't have the answer for that, because I admit I'm kind of a little badger on the field, so I don't really suffer from this issue. But for some that have, it's been a real mental gymnastics rung to go in and be like, no, I own this space. You're engaging in the fight with me. I'm not giving it to you. You'll get a good fight, but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna take responsibility for your emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally does. I know women tend to have that issue way more than men do, obviously, having confidence in their skills and ability. We're much more prone to self-doubt and stuff. Like, okay, so like this class right here, the only reason I'm teaching this class is because months ago, somebody had reached out to me about something and they said, oh yeah, by the way, if you want to teach a class, that would be great. And then like 2 nights later, I'm like ranting and raving to my husband about gender differences in the SCA and just gendered issues like gender science all night long. And he's just like, you should maybe teach that class. And I was like, are you sure though? Like, will people really want to hear that? And yeah, people want to hear that. But I had that doubt in like, not even just doubt in my ability, but also doubt in other people's desire to hear it. And like that kind of goes back to like hosting and wanting to make sure everybody has a fun time and not just yourself. And it's just like, well, sometimes it doesn't matter what the other person wants. Sometimes it needs to be said. Sometimes things need to happen.
And to further that, I actually, in the slightly the same vein, is that, especially after I got knighted, was trying not to take on, my path is not your path, and it's not other women's path. And so it was really difficult for me not to go out there and have people come up to me, and especially a lot of the non-fighters are like, man, it's really awesome to see a woman out there. And I'm like, I'm not doing this for you. Not to be a jerk. Like, I appreciate that you are happy for me. But that was something that was, I've actually especially in the last year, really had to take aside and be like, you know what, I will support anybody who wants to talk at any point of day, but I'm not taking responsibility for your journey.
Yeah. And that's a hard one too, because it's so, I think it's kind of easy in some ways.
And you want to do the support of all the people. You're like, yeah, but by the same token, you're like, no, wait, I'm not a token. I don't want to be the token. I just want to fight.
I actually read an article here, and Jed, I have seen your hand. I read an article recently, and they were talking about did I lose the thought? I lost the thought. I'll come back to it, and I remember. What were you going to say, Jed?
I just wanted to offer like a little bit of clarification on just to go back for about 12 seconds. Calibration and the ability to be able to control your strikes under adrenaline as a kickboxer, as a boxer, as a sword fighter is something that needs to be trained. The reason that people cannot do it is because they don't train to do it. And if that's a hard thing to hear for a lot of people, but that is why things are that's why it's hard to control things when people can control. I'm a kickboxer. I've literally broken 2x4s with my shin. I can throw that strike at a level to someone's head where I can tap their ear, or I can break a 2x4 with a leg kick. The reason that it's hard is because it's not trained. Also, the other thing with calibration is that it's not necessarily tournaments, but it's for training. It's the things that it's the time you're spending with your cooperative training partners. In Kaya's book, it's social violence in play. Kaya's a good friend of my other teacher and I's school. But Kaya's great. We love Kaya. It's where you're spending your time with the people you're working with. That's where calibration is really important. And the more time I can spend working with my partner and not injuring them, not having them sit out because they're winded because of whatever reason, is more time that I get to play and I get to get better. This thing we say in links, don't break your training partner, you don't get a new one.
Yeah. Don't break your friends.
Yeah, exactly.
And that kind of goes back to having structured practices. If you don't have a structured practice, it's going to be really hard for you to learn calibration. It's going to be really hard for you to learn techniques. Just in general, it's going to be hard for you to learn these stuff or these things. But yeah.
Any of those things are skills that need to be worked on. They're not just things that are innately challenging.
Yeah, they take practice. Just like stabbing somebody in the face with the lightest touch takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of skill. And it takes a while to train that because you go through periods of hitting too hard, you go through periods of hitting too light, and you got to learn that middle ground and stuff. And I think, we see that a lot with Rapier, right? I know I've had to, I pull up my shots about this much too short half the time because I'm scared of hitting my opponent. And so I have to work on, in my training environment, saying, hey guys, I am working on connecting my shot. I might hit a little bit harder. Please tell me what my touch is like. And we have that open communication and dialogue with my partner beforehand. And they're aware of what I'm working on in that practice so that I don't hit too hard and I learn how to just touch them.
Calibration is almost just kind of a way to practice communicating with your partners. And you just build that space that allows it to be accepting. You don't have to force it. You build it and it allows it to happen.
And that's a part of creating a culture and an environment around safety and inclusivity as well, because that's something I think a lot of the SCA does need, is learning how to create a safe practice environment, how to create, and not just a physically safe practice environment, but an emotionally safe practice environment. And that comes through having open discussion with your practice people about what you're working on, what you're scared of, why are you not making that breakthrough? Like I said, I was scared of hitting people. That was a fear I had. You wouldn't think it. Like I thought, I'm good. I'm not scared of hitting people, yet my shots are still an inch short. So obviously there's something in there that's scared of hitting people. So I need to work on breaking through that wall, right? But I the only way I'm going to work on breaking through that wall is if I feel comfortable and if I feel emotionally safe and physically safe with the people I'm working with.
Yep, that was all I want to add.
Yeah,
thanks.
Cool. Yes. I don't feel safe in tournaments. I've seen the bruises and the welts my husband walks away with, and I have no desire to receive those. I have heard the discussions or the things around concussions, and I know part of that comes from your equipment and having good equipment, but good equipment is also expensive. So there's a bit of a financial barrier because my husband's got his armor and then I have my armor. That's 2 sets of armor, which is a lot of money. And then I have my Rapier equipment on top of that. So part of it is financial, but another part of it is safety. And quite frankly, I feel like I would have to conform a lot to that environment, and I would have to change a lot of my behaviors in that environment to fit or to mesh or to have some level of success. And I'm just not willing. And I find I just have a lot more fun on the war field. I feel like that's a fun environment, and I feel it's pretty chill for the most part. Which I don't think most people would describe a war environment as chill, but it feels it's comfortable, I guess is what I mean. Yeah, there's more space. There's less pressure, I guess. There's less pressure for me on a war field than there would be in a tournament. And I think it's really, really easy for people to get amped up in a tournament to win versus to get amped up in a war field where I can just avoid that person. Right. But if you're in a tournament, you can't avoid the person who's amped up. No. So, yeah. Right. But on the war field, you can be like, oh, yeah, that dude's not taking hits. He's obviously amped up. I'm going to go over here. And you can kind of pick and choose your situation. I also run pike, too. So I'm not very, I guess, up in it, if you will. I kind of just stand by and poke people in the face. So it also utilizes some of my rapier skills. So that's why. Yeah, onto your wars are low stakes. Yeah. But that's why. And I'll be honest too, my path is Rapier right now as well. So I'll point that out. That's easier to focus on one thing at a time. Wars for stakes lead to hard feelings. Yeah, I could see that. But
it looks like Ulrich, you have a question? Oh, I think you're muted.
No, I just had muted myself. I hope my laundry machine isn't too loud. I didn't balance my load quite well.
Oh.
Like where society isn't that well balanced. There's bad joke. Sorry. Yeah, with like the calibration issue in fighting, I've noticed that that's part of the biggest reason that we see people drop out. But it's because we don't have a uniform structure across how we teach. Every shire handles their practice a little bit differently. Shires, like in Cold Keep, they were running practice differently. Unfortunately, since I've been back, I haven't been able to be to one since we're in the middle of a plague. But when I was in Danescombe, they ran their practices much differently than in Cold Keep. And my first near miss with the SCA was, actually, no, I had two near misses. One was in Chilliwack, which is Lions Gate or something. And then I would see guys practicing in New West. And the way that all of those practices were run was all of a very different culture. So I think if we could kind of standardize something a little bit more, like I know standardization isn't exactly the name of our culture, the name of the game, but then if we could create a culture that is actually fairly standard in how we run a practice, build a guideline for how to run a successful practice, and then try and hold people to that. Maybe include it in martial training or something to that effect, because like when I took my junior martial training, like all I basically did was watch a couple practices and get told how to check somebody's armor. And that was the extent of it. There was nothing about teaching somebody how to gauge shots properly. There was nothing about teaching people how to run these drills and how to teach somebody how to throw an effective shot. And I think if we included that into the martial ed, then we can create a safer environment, which I think would lead to a lot more inclusivity and safer grounds for women to fight in. Because that I think has been a big thing that drives women away from at least the armored combat aspect of things. Like, you don't want to go home looking like you have bruises and stuff. So when I first started fighting, there was a young lady named Alexis up here that just started fighting at the same time. And she had her coworkers ask if her boyfriend was beating her because she showed up to work and she had bruises. And she's like, no, I just put on armor and hit people's sticks, and then laughed it off. But there was genuine concern behind there. So sorry if I'm kind of running rampant on that issue, but I think that is part of the central core of where we're losing people in armored combat.
Yeah, I could see that. And like, when it comes to running the structured practices, I'm not sure how to implement, if it should be included in the marshalling or not. I mean, what I've seen, and it's kind of hard because the SCA is a hobby, right? We don't have the benefit of being a HEMA school where there is a structure that we can create and an environment and that we're in charge of with, you know, a rule set that we adhere to in that sense with how things are expected. It's different depending on where you go to. And I think that is, you know, that is a small downfall in the way SCA practices are done, because it does, I think, allow for a lot of slippage and a lot of people to fall through the cracks and stuff like that. I think as it stands right now, the best thing you can do is look at how you want to practice to run in a way that creates safety for everybody, physical and mental and emotional, as I mentioned. And then just start doing that, because here's the thing, if you run a structured practice, you're going to see success with the people who come out of it. You just will. It just will. And then people will be like, damn, look at that. Like, look at this area. They got some kick-ass fighters coming out of that. What are they doing? And you will start to see that success from an environment or from a practice that's run with structure and run with safety as a forefront in the mind. People will succeed and people will be excited to join because they're seeing an environment that's A, comfortable for them to be in, one, that B, that they feel safe in, and C, they're getting success and they're getting the training that they need, and they're getting that confidence boost, especially if you're doing things like rotating instructors and stuff like that. That's something we used to do in gymnastics all the time, was we would have a different person lead the practice each time, so that we would get our confidence in looking at people and analyzing what they were doing and giving advice and feedback and vice versa. And they start doing that. I know one of the practices in Avical started doing that, and they started getting questions like, how come all of the fighters in your practice are doing so good? And they're like, well, we run a structured practice in threes. This is what we teach them, and this is how we teach them. You can do that too. It's working, obviously, or you can choose not to. And it kind of creates that excitement, I think. And that's the only way I think people can really do that at the moment, as like a start it now kind of a thing. I think if you want to include other stuff in like marshalling and teaching in that sense, it's going to be a longer path, because you got policies and stuff, rules to change, which is always longer and harder to do. Yeah, everyone has a different learning speed and comfort. Totally.
I noticed that we have more questions, but I also know that our speaker has now been at this for 3 hours. And so I would maybe check in and make sure that you were okay and not dying or something.
Good, I'm not dying.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure.
You've been in the hot seat on some difficult topics for quite a long time now.
I guess so, yeah. If we want to change topic, that's fine. I'm cool either way.
Okay,
I can talk for days on this.
Okay, I just wanted to check in with you, make sure that you were.
We know you're cool.
Get her
a coffee. Yeah.
Actually, you know what? He was so sweet. He made me a pot of tea before we started, and then he also cut up orange slices and vegetables and did a little platter for me and got it all set up. Yeah, I have an awesome husband.
How do I get my my platter? Somebody's falling down on the job. Dang, that's awesome. Good work, Draven.
Right? Yeah. I'm on it.
As always, he's on it. Is there a question from Shannon?
Oh, okay, cool.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if it's a question, but I was kind of like a really new fencer, like 6 months before the plague started. So I'm still a really new fencer, but I'm an instructional designer by trade. And I just keep seeing on chat forums, and of course tonight over and over again, like we need to have structured practices, but like that's just saying that doesn't make it happen. It doesn't make the instructor know how to do that. And I think there's this fear that, you know, providing teaching tools and some really basic backbones of teaching training to the instructors who are really good fighters usually. And actually that's a whole other issue. Like, you know, the best fighters don't always make the best instructors and vice versa, as you all know. But there's this fear that is too heavy-handed and would become too uniform from place to place. But I think people who design lesson templates would say, you know, you're giving them tools to, you know, like a checklist to follow, like, you know, but you can depart, you can go off the cuff from that, you can change it up. And of course, ideally, you're going to have different people stepping in and doing things their way anyway. I mean, every teacher is going to do things differently, and every teacher is going to have creative ideas. I think this is very doable at like the society level to develop a set of templates for a lesson plan. Like, here's the drill, here's the warm-up phase of the lesson, here's the drill phase with some simple repetition. If you're indoors in a space with a mirror so you can see yourself, like aerobics class, what are you doing? You know, that's great. And you sort of build up to the more applied parts to all of this, which is like the sparring, right? And then that hopefully gets you the great benefits that we've been talking about all evening, where everyone, you know, gets to shine and gets to feel comfortable and safe, and truly warm up and transition through phases of doing this in a, you know, in a way that's like really effective learning and teaching. So I don't know who, like how far up the chain, like who to tell about this, but it is like, I do this for a living. It's very doable to like you know, just draft these. And then of course, some people do it already. So there would be videos to show that, you know, to showcase like examples of, you know, what kind of instructor you can be or something. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, I have trouble with some of these questions in the SCA too. I'm not going to lie, because like the resources are there. They are. You just have to take the initiative to look for them. I mean, like, especially for things like Rapier, okay, because that's obviously my background is like, I have a shit ton of Rapier books, modern and not modern. I have the texts and I have new books as well. And they're there. And, and we have that benefit through the rise of things like HEMA and stuff like that, where there are much more resources on how to teach this specific thing, and it's not like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's there. You just kind of have to
I think
and look for
you
it.
almost want to say it's not rocket science. Like, this is so doable. This is low hanging fruit.
It really
we can
is.
we can do like our own version of this for the SCA.
Yeah.
We don't, it's not actually a big deal.
No, it isn't. I think people want to make it a bigger deal than it is as a way to feel like they are doing something. Because it seems like it should be complicated, but it isn't. And then I think people make it more complicated than it needs to be, as a way of delaying the work that needs to be done. Because the work that needs to be done is, sometimes it's that internal stuff that you got to work on, or you kind of, the idea sounds good, but you're not quite committed to actually following through on it. So you make all these in-between steps that make it seem harder than it is, right? But yeah, there's stuff out there, and I think it's easier to set up a structured practice than most people realize. It just takes somebody who wants to do it, or somebody to take the initiative, which is going to be uncomfortable, and it's not going to be the same for, not everybody's going to want to join in, but you can always do your own structured practice. And if you get one other person, you only need 2 people to make a practice.
I think people need to also keep in mind too that just because you heard it from one person, it's okay if it doesn't sink in.
Yeah.
You can hear it from like 3 different people, and it might be the 4th person who says exactly the same thing, and that's okay. Don't worry about that. And that doesn't matter what gender you are.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of like, no, I totally get that. I've heard something 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, and then finally somebody says it in a different way that makes sense, or they show it in a different way that makes sense. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yep.
That's what you mean.
Such a muppet afterwards. You're like, oh,
You're like, that was so simple.
And it can come, and the other thing, it can come from any source too. Like, you never stop learning from everybody.
Yes.
And there's an art to shifting or to sifting shitty advice and good advice. So it's
Mhm.
not a bad idea to take it all in and then kind of analyze it on your own terms.
Yeah, you take it and then you cherry pick what works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, don't take it. It's fine. You don't have to don't be a jerk if you're not going to take the advice, and just say, oh yeah, I'll take that under advisement. Thank you. Like,
Stomp off through your stuff and run, walk away. This is garbage. Yeah, no, don't do that.
Right. Be polite, but yeah.
And I think that was really hard for me to learn in the beginning, because I had so many people telling me how to throw a proper shot.
Oh God.
And I tried to do what every single person said, and I failed miserably until I found people to clarify what others meant, so that I knew I understood 100% what they were trying to tell me.
Totally. Well, and I think that's really important too, if you're serious about going down a path for knighthood or to be a member of the Order of Defense. Finding somebody to help you sift through the information you're getting is really important, because if you're not tied to anyone and you're serious about going down that path, it's going to be hard, because everyone's going to give you advice and it's going to be different or slightly different, or what they think you should do to be the kind of fighter that you could be. And like everyone has a different idea of the paths you could go down, right? So they're going to give you advice tailored to that path that they think. So if you can find somebody to help you sift through that and be like, that makes a difference, totally. Because if not, you can get lost real quickly. Spoke theory.
My voice teacher called it that. So the concept is the hub in the middle of the wheel, and all the different ways of approaching that are the spokes.
Okay.
So if you don't understand one way, try a different spoke.
There you go. That makes sense.
Finally, it's said to you in the way that you sort of go, I get it now.
Yeah, totally, right?
Good night, all.
Good night. Thanks for joining. Yeah.
There's been a lot of questions. Maybe as a general question to women in the fighting community that are feeling a little stuck and a little overworked. overlooked, not over, well, overlooked. What are some things maybe besides award recommendations that peers outside or people outside that the fighting communities can do to support you?
I think, oh, someone has their hand up.
I have one. Please don't interrupt us right before a tournament. Because here's a thing about being a lady who is a fighter. I realize that I'm very visible. And when I am in the right before, you know, it's Ursumus or whatever, I'm getting my kit together and getting my stuff. As much as I super want to encourage your new fighter or talk to your kid or, you know, just generally be kind of a celebrity, right before I get on the field is the absolute worst time to do that, because it pulls me out of fighter brain and puts me into hosting brain. And that is, that's really disruptive to my fight. And sometimes it takes everything in me, and I do, to be gracious, but then that means that I don't fight as well as I might. So that is a wait until after the tournament, or when I've, you know, ideally after I am no longer wearing armor, because here's another thing that happens to me is that when I put on a pretty dress, people forget that I am a fighter. Like, you know, sometimes I'm even wearing the red belt and there's a group of people talking stick and I just get literally looked over because they, you know, it's, they forget that that's also who I am. So, you know, there's, I really do want to talk to you, and I really do want to encourage you to, you know, get on the field if that's what you want to be talking about, but not right before Ursumus. Thank you very much.
Yeah, don't interrupt people before tournaments. It's rude. Anybody, but you know, women, some headspace is like fragile sometimes. Some people have a really strong headspace and it's like that for them, but other people, it takes a lot of buildup and there's rituals that they go through before a tournament. And if you interrupt that could throw off their whole game. So don't do that. Wait until after. I forgot what you asked, Eva, though.
Well, I guess I'm curious, sort of more specifically, when you become a peer in the SCA, you take on some of the privileges of leadership, and some of that is that people listen to you more than they did before. What are some ways we can leverage peerages to support female fighters?
Bring them up.
Yeah.
Talk about them, highlight them. It's not like they're not there, but bring them into the conversation more, I think. And highlight the work that they do. Like I think there's, okay, so we didn't get to do this because of the plague, but I was going to host Northern Brawl 2, which was structured super practice, I guess. So there was lesson tracks and everything like that. And the theme of it was female fighters and gender minority fighters. That was it. So I made a point of trying to find as many female fighters that I could to teach classes, because it's not like they're not there. It's not like female fighters can't teach classes. You don't have to be a knight or a mod to teach that, right? And if you have the skill, you have the skill. If you have the knowledge, you have the knowledge, right? And so I was making a point to reach out to that. So I think bringing women into the conversation, bringing gender minority fighters into the conversation when you can, and stuff like that, and highlighting them is a thing that can be done pretty easily, I think, you know. And then also, like, in practice spaces, I mentioned in the thing, you know, using women for demonstrations, having women teach classes or kind of lead the practice, I think is also key and important, because they can, why not? And it puts them in positions of authority.
Rotary, I see that you have a question, but I'm just gonna wrap this up and then over to you for a second. It's interesting because one of the things of putting together, so this platform, Lions Den, every week somebody comes in and very kindly gives a talk, or there's a panel discussion. And I was having real trouble getting squires to teach. I wanted to do a heavy fighting thing. I was gonna do once a month, have have a fighting thing and having fighting part of that. And squires seem very unwilling to teach. And I talked to my husband about it, and I was like, what's, because he's a knight, and I said, what's going on? And it's like, well, it's considered kind of like in the heavy fighting community, knights are the ones who teach, and that like squires can be seen as being kind of uppity. Whereas, but now when I think about it, if there's a barrier, if you're a female or a gender minority squire, and there is a ceiling to becoming a knight, does that preclude you then? Does that culture preclude you from teaching? Like, are you robbed of that teaching opportunity in that community?
Okay, so like I've mentioned that I'm not always great on social cues. So I tend to talk to everybody the same regardless of status. Inside and outside the SCA. And that can be a great thing. And that can also be like a not so great thing, because people are kind of like, wow, who's this chick? So I don't know. I didn't really even consider, when I was thinking about running Northern Brawl, I didn't even think about whether somebody had a white belt or a red belt, or they had a red scarf or a white scarf or anything like that. I was like, I know that you're good at this thing, so I think you should teach on it, and I'm going to give you a platform to do so.
I think it's
I don't know if I broke social customs with that, and if I did, because I know with the first Northern Brawl, I was encouraged to get Masters of Defense and Knights to teach, right? But then with the second one, I was like, I want to highlight women fighters, so I don't give two craps about that, because reality is there's just not quite enough to draw on to have as many teachers for that, right? Especially close, who like aren't traveling 8+ hours to get there, right? So I was like, I don't really, and I don't know. I think if you're gonna learn, you're gonna learn. But Rotrude, you had your hand up too.
This actually ties into this. It's very flattering and super validating to be asked my opinion / asked to teach something that has nothing to do with my gender. So if you ask me, ask me about how learning to fight is like learning how to drive, or ask me about my experience as a fighter with a visual disability, like that is the thing that I can teach you that that doesn't have to do with me necessarily being a female and a fighter. So it's like it's asking. It's a little bit akin to like always asking the one person of color in your group to always teach EDI classes. Maybe you should ask them to teach other things in their field of expertise. I mean that is and yes, I would agree. There is there is also the social stigma of like, I actually had to ask my knight the other day, like, would it be, too forthright to teach a class on X thing that I have been thinking about teaching a class on? And he's like, well, technically, no, you might get that, but that it shouldn't be that way. So I think that's a very valid point, is we should be learning from a greater pool of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Yeah. I had a point and I forgot. Well, hi. Draven, you have your hand up.
There you go. I'm on unmute there. I know what your Grace, you were talking about that with the knights here, and here's what I keep hearing, especially with peerages, is you're not. What is that old refrain? Like you keep hearing it. It's like peers aren't made; they're recognized. And so if you have, I fight heavy and I fight rapier as well too. If you're the expectation is that you're a leader, but it's frowned upon that you teach, but yet that's what knights do. That goes against that kind of refrain with respect to peerages, specifically to knights. So that'd be a kind of a question to kind of put back to them. It's like, well, if you expect them to be a leader, do you expect him or her or they to be leaders in that sense? Then that's totally what happens. But I to your point as well too. I've seen that happen on even the rapier side. So rapier is not like we're not perfect. I remember those conversations when you had cadets or people that were non-white scarves when the Master of Defense weren't there. And I remember seeing those discussions in there. Is that uppity for a cadet to be teaching a class? And that was discussions that happened. So it's definitely, I don't know if I can't speak, of course, because I'm not on mod council, but it like those were discussions that had happened as well too. But by and far, what I found in White Scarves councils was that overall it was seen to be a positive thing when someone was teaching. And if like I remember the comments we had back on people that had complained about that, if a candidate or someone was doing that, well, why aren't you in there teaching? They're just filling the gap, and they do know their stuff. So it's like if you feel that strongly about it, Don so and so or whatever, get in there and teach as well too, or help them rather than just complaining about someone stepping up and being a leader. So those are just some thoughts on that. So great.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Draven. And I think it's a holdover from the age of there being a very strict pecking order to practices where it was led by a senior peer and then you knew your place, and you're like, which is super unhealthy, and the SCA has been moving away from that for a long time. But I get the sense it's like you're out of your pecking order if you're going to teach at a practice which is somebody else's turf. But that's a different world, and now there's this whole social media thing where we're all sort of at a round table. And I think that is sort of a vestige of a very unhealthy dynamic that has led to a lot of abuse and a lot of other things that are very. I have an issue with the power struggle, the powers in the SCA. And I think that absolutely we should be encouraging squires and leadership and people coming up in the Rapier community and everyone else, like how to be leaders. And part of that is teaching and impacting your community. Like, can you imagine? Yeah, can you imagine if Laurels were like, oh yeah, nobody else teach but us? Like, no, that just sounds like a lot of work. Like, no, I'm lazy. Like, you go do the stuff. Yeah.
I'll be honest, if someone's discouraging another person from teaching, it honestly feels like gatekeeping. It really does. And I can understand you don't want, like, not wanting someone to teach bad habits. Like, I get that. But if that's the case, then where are you as their leader, as a leader in the community? Where are you to correct those bad habits before they get taught to somebody else? And here's the other thing, depending on where you are, if you come from a barony and it's big, awesome. Yeah, you have a fuck ton of knights and white scarves and mods to teach. That's great. I live 3 hours away from the nearest barony and we have one white scarf, which is my husband. And you're going to say only these people should be teaching? I'm like, okay, well, then you better start traveling up here, sir, or madam, or person. Like, you need to get your ass up here. If you're going to say that only certain people should teach, then you need to be traveling a lot to fill the gap, right? Because at the end of the day, not everybody has that privilege to just have an abundance of knights or white scarves or mods to teach these things. So, there's flex, but yeah. I've never seen it as an issue before, though.
There's an old academia saying that we've taken up very well in HEMA, and that's the only thing you need to teach is to be 1 page ahead of the next guy. If I open up this book on Highland swordsmanship, and I open it to the 3rd page, and everyone else is on the 3rd page, I only have to open it to the 4th to know something that they don't.
There you go.
If I know a thing, it is my responsibility to share it with people.
Well, that was like, so for Ramsgard, for where I'm from, like a lot of I know Draven had talked about this when I started, which was that because he was one of the more well-traveled people in the community, he would take lessons from where he went and then bring them back and teach them to everyone else at the practice so that they can continue growing. And I think we need that kind of stuff. So I think teaching should be for everyone. I saw someone had their hand up though. Yeah, you. I don't know how to say your name, I'm sorry.
Saiv.
Sorry, say it again?
Saiv.
Saiv?
Yeah, Saiv Vaves, if you include the by name there, but yeah, Saiv is fine. So a couple of things here. One of the things that my pal helped encourage me, because one of the things, especially with the peers that you were mentoring, well, I was encouraged and I got the honor to then go out as his protege to go mentor other people. So I picked a few new people to our Barony and said, hey, I'd like to be, you're a wonderful person. I'd like to be the person you can come to with any questions. If you want to be introduced to something or someone, let's talk, let's get you in there. What are you interested in and how can I help you find that? And so that was something I really enjoyed doing. So I feel that that's kind of what you're talking about in that. As for, I know you said women, for what women would need to help encourage them into these things, being a little more sort of gender inclusive, I switched that around to, for me, instead of just being about moms, being primary parent, because I mean, I do actually even know couples where the primary parent is not necessarily the mom, but helping these people maybe get their kids in order, okay, fine, but then let go of that mentality and step into that other thing, whether it's to teach or to get involved with their craft or their service, or as because we're talking about fighting and rapier, help them get into that mental mindset. Because as you're saying, you kind of need to be in a mindset to succeed, to do well as well as you can in that Eric or even on the war field. And if the person hasn't quite switched from caregiver to fighter, and I hear it a lot from, say, well, because of the gender norms, the women, as they're supporting their husband or their spouse into their out onto the Eric, flipping that around and just saying the primary parent still needs that space to become the fighter they can be. And maybe even going into, say, the arts and sciences competitions or displays, going into doing a big service like event coordination or any aspect of that, giving these people some space to just be in that mindset instead of half their brain being on their responsibilities as parent.
Totally. So I've seen that a lot, and I know Draven and I have worked long and hard on getting ourselves situated in such a way so that when we go up to a tournament, making that transition from thinking about organizing, getting things structured, getting things ready to tournament mindset is simpler. And part of that includes things like making sure we have the right snacks there, making sure we have this taken care of and everything like that. Like having everything prepped and lined up, because it's totally a process to switch from caregiver mode, husband mode, wife mode to tournament mode or like business mode. Like there's a transition in that. And I think that's especially true with parents, especially if your kids are at the event, right? Draven and I, we tend to leave our kids at home for events and stuff, which makes things a little bit easier. But our son's also like in grade 8. So there's also the age difference there. So he's, and his big brother's at home. So we don't have to worry about him as much, right? But yeah, in primary caregiver, I try to use more gender neutral pronouns, but I slip up. But yes, I try to say gender minority fighters because it's more fully encompassing of everybody than just.
Well, it's also
women.
We do have, whether you're in or out of the SCA, there's a vast majority of primary parents who are the moms.
Yeah.
And that is a thing that we need to address, especially if we're addressing women fighters or women in leadership roles. And yes, that does then also step into the gender minorities.
Yeah, totally. And like, I know even in my relationship with Draven, when we first started coming back to the SCA, there was a lot of things that we had to sort through in terms of making sure that one or the other could be in the right headspace for whatever we were doing with that event, whether it was running a tournament, participating in a tournament, or whatever it was we were doing. It's understanding what our roles are with each other, I suppose, because generally speaking, it's the woman's duty, or it falls on the woman in the relationship to prep the food for the event, pack the lunches, make sure food's ready for lunch and dinner at the event, take care of the children, or do like the little things, you know, the little things that you don't really want to think about, but you have to think about, right? And so because my husband and I are both fighters, and I was doing a lot of that stuff just because I just do. We were like, well, let's pack food that's easy. Let's pack snacks and pre-done dinners so that I just have to eat cold food, which is totally fine, but it's nutritious and it fills the thing. And he's not worrying about food. I'm not worrying about food. And we can just be like, cool, I'm done. I'm going to go pick that. Or if we could afford it, buy into kitchens. Like, wow, what a thought. If you can afford it, buy into a kitchen, because then somebody else takes care of your food for you and you can take the time that you need to focus on whatever you got to focus on. It takes one less thing off your plate, right? Yeah, because a lot of these duties tend to fall to one or the other partner, usually the woman. So keep that in mind. Hi. But yeah. I see hands up. Holla. Edwina, do you have
I believe Draven was first.
Okay.
I just to follow up on what you were talking about, Savia. That's by no means is it like I fight heavy in rapier. So when I go to events, it's you know, when you get up all the way till pretty much night, and so I'm pretty drained, and I'm not like the most athletic dude or person out there as well too. So it's harder on my body for sure. I think what we've worked out is a system that's independent, that's caring, and also there's times I'll tell Savia, it's like I'm doing garden or I'm doing something or whatever. I don't really need you, so. But it's just communication really, and there's trial and error and everything like that. And a lot of our discussions that happen with respect to fighting and cool things that happen during an event, that's for the drive home. Like we save it for them. Like we don't be like, hey, I got to tell you about this or I got to tell you about that. It's like, no, we got 8 hours driving back to Canada to talk about all of that. And such. So we've learned to communicate well in that sense, but also it's just it's really fine tuning it, and it's a work in process. When we first started, it was really big struggle for sure in terms of, because I'm also a caretaker type of person too. So I like taking care of people that are really close to me and such. And so I don't have a household anymore really. So it was really all my attention towards Savia. So she got a lot of that, and vice versa as well too. So I think that's it's worked, but there's a lot around preparation and independence as well too, that the tools are there. You just go grab food or water or whatever it is. But if you can, if you have time, like if I'm stuck at court and I'm guarded, I can't run off. That's where I'll rely on her and say, I need you to check in, or grab some water for me or something like that, or some snacks, or leave them in this area and such. So that's often helped for sure in our busy events are pretty busy for sure. So thank you.
Yeah, we have to have pre-conversations about what we're doing for the weekend, because he fights two, like armor combat and rapier, and then I fight rapier. And then if we're a part of a guard, then there's also that. So we kind of have to like debrief before we go to the event about what's going to happen and when we need the most support and when we don't need the most support, like figuring that out. And that's hard. Well, Edwina?
So my question was, it took me this whole time to sort of figure it out, and then my brain stopped. My question came up back when you were doing your slides, and it just came back to my brain and then left. Sorry, concussion. Oh, it was about changing. So when I first started practicing, even though there was change rooms for men and women, all the guys would line up along the wall and change. Cat cat everywhere. And they would all line up and change. Basically, you would have all these guys in just their cups lined up, and it wasn't very safe or friendly for most people. Yeah. I do notice that happens a lot at wars and things like that. Is there something you would suggest?
I honestly don't know. That wasn't something I thought about. And we've been to the same, well, I guess I have thought about it. I mean, we go to the same practices, but
I mean, we see these guys all the time.
it can be
like,
very uncomfortable, right? If you, especially when you already have change rooms. I can understand on a war field if you don't have a change room or your encampment is way the hell over there, like, okay, whatever, you know, go off to the side, whatever. And so, but if you have a change room, use it. but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure on that one, honestly. But I can see how that would, it makes people uncomfortable, or it can, you know.
Just being aware of that situation, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think also that's like a change too. That I think that's a handover from having almost exclusively men at a practice. And then only one woman and she can just deal with it. Or she can go change wherever she wants, right? But we're going to change right here in the middle of the practice space. And I think that's a handover from having an all men kind of environment and changing to other genders now being included. So
as long as it doesn't weird them out if I do it too. Sauce for the gander, sauce for the goose.
I was gonna say I've done it before. I may have left my shirt on and changed everything underneath my tunic, but I've more than once just changed out there on the field.
Yeah.
So, which actually has provoked some awkward from the guys where you can they're like, oh, that's not appropriate. I'm like, so there it is. How do you feel?
Tables have turned.
Yeah. But by and large, actually, we're pretty lucky here. Most of the guys are like the bathroom, whatever.
And if it's there, why not?
I think a lot of them are sort of a lot more self-conscious now too, especially because there's a lot more working out going on. Nobody wants to be out.
Yeah, right. You know.
I think one of the things that we try and embrace up here anyway, well, first of all, it's cold most of the time, so we find damn change rooms. The other thing is if it wouldn't be covered by a swimsuit, you go find a change room. Nobody wants to see you bend over, pick up a gauntlet when you're wearing a G-string. Nobody.
Yeah.
Maybe Corsac.
Oh,
that's completely fair.
I love you, Corsac.
I love that guy.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. Did Kiva disappear?
I think she, yeah.
On
that as well, like just, I guess what I'm kind of hearing around that as well is just making it a more inclusive space. If I'm kind of reading your comments, Edwina, on that, it's just more inclusivity, which is what, ultimately the goal is to be as inclusive to people of very genders, different genders, and beliefs and such there. So I mean, I think that's the kind of point of that as well too.
Well, and in a mental health sense, now that we're more and more accepting of mental health, it can be an actual trigger for somebody, right? And it could lead to people silently leaving that fighting community and our community, right?
Yeah, it's around creating a safe environment, right?
Well, it's boundaries.
Not just physically safe, and boundaries, yeah.
I don't know if I've known you for 20 years. I still don't want to see you in your cup. I just don't.
No.
Yeah.
Good. We're good.
The only time
I don't want to see me in my cup.
The only time I ever seen that professionally was fire department, because I was a volunteer fire department. It was it had I think 3 female, but the rest were, I was like probably about a 3/4 ratio guys and such there. And so when you're changing in your gear, it's not like you slip from your pants and shirt and everything. You're getting right down to it. Just basically whatever your underwear, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember that being weird for new people, because everybody's just stripping down and trying to get into the truck as fast as they can, with whatever they can at that point in time. So no one's really looking at all. And if you are, then what the heck, you got seconds. Where's your focus? So, but that's the only time I ever seen that it was okay, was really in that environment, was where people just strip it down really quickly and getting in their gear. So yeah.
An emergency environment.
Yeah. I don't need to see there where everybody's like, yeah, we're going to sit and have this conversation. I'm like, no, that is not what I need to have for 20 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, and I think a lot of these things, like I said, they're handovers from when it was majority men showing up. And now that there's other genders and women coming up, it's like, oh yeah, maybe that's not cool. Maybe that could change. Like, yeah.
I think we're seeing a bit of a generational thing too. Like I work in construction too, and a lot of those kind of like old stereotypes of gender type, those dogs are passing on. And as the younger guys come up, they've been raising a lot of this anyway. So it's been interesting watching society as a whole start to shift on that front. Yeah. So now we just gotta, tease our old dogs.
Yeah. Right.
And I guess it goes with the, if you see something happening and you see somebody uncomfortable, speak up.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't speak up. So you speak up.
Totally. Yeah. If you have a voice and you're comfortable using it, use it. Right.
We do get trapped in that though. It's not what you say, but how you say it sometimes, because there's occasionally you get somebody who's super offended and they crank it right to 11 and everybody gets really defensive. So it's finding that happy medium of like, all right, if you're going to go to 11, that's awesome, but maybe go away for 5 minutes and then come back, or find somebody who can interface a little bit better. So
you got to find the diplomat in your group to talk for you.
Sometimes, because Lord knows I've been a victim of it, where somebody's come up to me and they're like, man, you have an issue. And my first reaction is,
yeah,
which is not cool.
Yeah, make sure that if you're going to intercede on this, which is great, but make sure that person wants you to intercede. Don't go fighting battles for people who don't want battles fought. I've had that. I know Draven's had it, and where someone's like, I can't believe you offended that person. They come up to me and they apologize. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think a big thing to do is speak to some of the organizers of the event. Make sure that the appropriate changing areas are available, and it's just forewarning. Just say, hey guys, girls, whoever, we're gonna change over here, or change in the bathrooms, or show up to the don't leave your gear on the field, that kind of stuff. Little bit of forewarning, and it makes courtesy a lot easier to deal with.
Totally.
Unless there's a fire, in which case we're all allowed to drop trowel. Draven said so.
This is the Draven approved message for tonight.
That is, yeah.
Eyes down on your gear, no peripherals.
That's right, yeah.
Oh no.
You don't have to stop, drop, and roll when everything's already dropped.
Burning Man rule. Whatever happens at Burning Man stays at Burning Man.
Oh.
Except for STIs, those come with you.
Oh, rough.
Oh gosh. I think so. It's been a while.
You rock, Dre.
Yes.
Yeah. 6 a.m. comes early. I really appreciate you guys putting on this talk and that kind of stuff, just because this is I albeit was very blind to this issue until Marin, my lady, started fighting, and I started seeing some of these issues coming up, and I was really just kind of colorblind to a lot of this stuff, just because I'm a big dude. I just wandered in, and just everything was kind of tailor-made for me, exactly like you had said. Like, this environment was built for somebody who's 6 foot tall and just likes to hit people with sticks. Like, it was pretty much a tailor-made environment. And then I just realized, like, oh, maybe I'm the bull in the china shop destroying everybody's classes. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm like being a good member of the community, especially with it being up north, and in the more isolated parts, you can have one person be a bad part of a community and just destroy an entire shire and make it not livable, right? So if I can do something to kind of help clean out some of the mess in my little corner of the world, then I'm definitely down. So
well, I'm glad I'm glad you got something out of it. I'm glad people like this was much bigger than I expected it to be, and I thank you for the platform. And I think there's some good discussions had, and thanks for everyone for sticking around for the whole length of it. It kind of devolved from a lesson into just general conversation, and then it just kind of kept going. But I like the conversation bits better.
Yeah,
Sometimes
that's often
conversations
how
are
these
better.
things go. They devolve into conversation because everybody's got a story.
Right, exactly. But I think that's how people learn the best too. Things stick better. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the Fire Night talks are my favorite. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And I
Bye,
think
folks. Take care. Hi, Kelvin. Take care.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's go.
Savia, we need to go for coffee. Or, Zoom coffee.
Zoom coffee. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. See you guys later.